The Sheikh's Forced Bride, Sharjah Sheikhs, Volume 1, written by Leslie North, narrated by Nicholas Thurkettle. Chapter 1. Sheikh Khalid Al-Qasimi took a deep breath to steady his nerves and let it out. He stared at the enormous wooden doors in front of him. Drawing another slow breath, he put his hands on the brass door handles. Once he stepped through those doors, his life would change forever, and not for the better. Letting go of the door, he shook his arms out and looked down at the traditional white robes of his country. From behind, Ahmed's deep voice carried to Khalid. "She makes a beautiful bride, and Mahmoud is a very traditional man, so I'm sure your wedding night with your bride will be a memory to treasure." Ahmed stepped up and nudged his brother's arm. Khalid shot him a scornful look. "You are partly to blame for our father making me do this. I'm not interested in Mahmoud or his daughter, and I don't care if she's a virgin. Do you think the women we saw in America were virgins?" Ahmed shrugged. "You knew this day was coming. Granted, maybe a day with father a bit less angry than he is just now. Wait until it's your turn. I suspect our father's mood has more to do with the level of our transgression and less to do with age. You're next, little brother." Khalid turned his attention to the door again, waiting for the peace he needed before walking through. Ahmed shook his head and offered up a weak smile. "It was just one night of fun." "Fun? A good time is one thing. Dishonor is another." Khalid placed a hand on his brother's shoulder. "And this is about family honor, and me keeping my place in our family. Now, go. I'll make my entrance behind you." "If there was another way." Ahmed let the words trail off. Khalid had thought the same thing, but he knew his choices here: marry or lose everything. He was not ready to say goodbye to his brothers or to his homeland, so he would take the other option father had put before him. He patted Ahmed's shoulder and dropped his hand. Ahmed shook his head, pulled his black bisht with the gold trim over his shoulders, and opened the doors. It was strange to see Ahmed in anything but the perfectly tailored suits he always wore. Ahmed stepped into the room, his white keffiyeh swaying as he walked. Khalid understood that it was each son's responsibility to preserve their family's honor. He understood his father's reasons for arranging this marriage, but of course the main reason was that it would combine both families' wealth, and this marriage prevented Khalid from marrying anyone else. In other words, from making yet another mistake. The marriage would make perfect political and business sense, but Khalid preferred a world that was not quite so calculating. He had always thought that someday, a much later someday, he would marry a woman whom he loved, regardless of her background. That was yet another dream to be set aside, it seemed. Khalid took another deep breath, reminding himself that he was destined to one day become Sultan. He never should have disrupted the meeting. But he'd been drinking, and of course his father had found out. The embarrassment had proven Khalid's undoing. "Marry and prove yourself worthy of your family's name, or never show yourself to me or to anyone of your family again." Sultan bin Mohammed al-Qasimi's words had been harsh, but Khalid had at least been happy to have been given a choice, such as it was. He would prove he was ready to accept his responsibilities. He drew his own black bisht over his shoulders, adjusting the tail of his keffiyeh out so the headpiece could hang down his neck onto his back. He pulled the gold trim close in front and then followed Ahmed's path up the aisle. The ballroom seemed to be packed to capacity with both families, but not everyone in attendance was a blood connection. A few of his father's American business partners stood out in their tailored suits. Everyone else wore traditional garments. Khalid pasted on a stiff smile. He would get through this somehow. The deep red carpeting and golden walls seemed to him garish. Lights glittered in the golden chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. Further back from the main aisle, round tables covered with white table covers stood out against the carpet. Golden chairs boasted red cushions the same color as the carpet. In the Western weddings he'd been to, Khalid had seen the guests seated in rigid rows, all facing the front in some sort of somber ritual. But weddings in Sharjah were celebrations through and through. The party began before the ceremony took place, and it lasted until the last person left. Reaching the front of the room, Khalid stepped up to where Mahmoud waited. Mahmoud gave Khalid a nod and then turned to the side. Double doors to the left of the ballroom opened, and Fadia stood framed in the entrance. Khalid had to admit she was gorgeous. She looked a queen in her golden dress that glittered with crystals and gold embroidery. Slender as she was, the dress almost seemed to overwhelm her. A headpiece covered her black hair, and a veil draped her shoulders to preserve her modesty. Curling designs had been tattooed onto her arms with red henna, and the swirls were almost lost under gold bracelets. He knew he was lucky to have such a beautiful bride chosen for him, but the forced choice still rankled. He wondered if Fadia had been given much of a choice, or had she simply been told by her father that she was to marry, and that was that. His stomach tightened and turned at the thought. She came to him, her stare fixed on the carpet. He tried to offer up the warm, loving smile she deserved, but she would not look at him. Her hands seemed to be trembling. From fear? At last she looked up. Her dark eyes seemed huge. She drew in a deep breath. She did not smile at him. He assumed they were both nervous for the same reasons. They knew next to nothing about each other. Did she hate this whole thing? Maybe that would be something for them to talk about after this was all over. He put his hand out to her, but the doors behind him banged open, voices lifted. Khalid glanced over and saw two burly security men, noticeable for their Western suits and their muscles, were trying to bar a woman who was struggling to keep a cell phone out of their reach. Her blonde hair was pulled back, and glasses obscured her eyes, but she was not dressed for a wedding. She struck him as attractive in tight blue jeans, a beige blazer over a button-up blouse. She also looked like a reporter. He could admire her courage, but he wished she had chosen some other place for its display. "I have a right to be here. This needs to be covered. Did you know that Sharjah is one of the few countries where women's rights are routinely ignored, and this is a prime example of that?" Khalid groaned. The woman's accent was clearly American, and brash. Had he not already courted enough trouble because of these Americans and their ideas? He glanced around, saw his father's face reddening, as was Mahmoud's. Black beards had started to bristle. Glancing at Fadia, he saw her staring at the woman, her eyes wide. The reporter was not wrestling with one of the security guards over possession of her cell phone, which no doubt had photos or videos. The Sultan had ordered no media. Khalid watched the woman's hair come undone and spill out golden strands. Her glasses fell to the floor, and she went after them, slipping away from the security men. The reporter rose and darted over to one of the American businessmen, pushing her cell phone into his face. "As the CEO of Ameritech, does your presence here mean you condone Sharjah's treatment of women as mere property?" Khalid winced. What could the poor man say? That he disapproved and have the Sultan ready to sever ties? Or that he approved and then watched that quote appear on American news? Security caught up with her. One man wrapped one hand around her waist and the other around her mouth, muffling her protests. The other grabbed her cell phone from her hand. They hustled her back out through the back doors, which clicked shut on what sounded like a threat to call the American embassy. The commotion had distracted the guests. Concerned whispers raised into a low murmur, and some stood as if to leave. Khalid glanced at his father. The old man was sending one of Khalid's uncles out of the room, presumably to be sure the woman had been arrested. The Americans had all stood and were tugging suits straight and looking at the exits. The unhappy expressions were impossible to miss or ignore. Khalid glanced down at his bride-to-be. She looked up at him, her lower lip trembling. He had no idea what he could say to her. In the next instant, she let out a shrill cry, and tears spilled from her eyes. Her father put a hand on her arm, but she smacked him away and cried out, "I'm not marrying anyone. She's right. I won't be treated like a barrel of oil." Hiking up her gown, she turned and ran from the room. Mahmoud shot Khalid a glare so hot it rivaled the sands of the desert. He followed after his daughter, begging her to be the reasonable child she had always been. Khalid blinked twice. West had apparently collided with his traditional wedding, and he was uncertain if he had been saved or cast from one disaster into a worse one. His father's hand fell onto his shoulder, a heavy weight, and the Sultan muttered, anger tight under his words,
Get your brothers. I do not know if there is anything of honor to be salvaged here."
Khalid shook his head. This was his wedding, his disaster to make right. Turning to the guests, he lifted his hands and his voice. "I do apologize for the interruption. Due to such inauspicious circumstances, this is obviously not a day for any wedding to be held. Please stay and enjoy the hospitality and the food provided." Turning, he headed after his brothers. They slipped into a smaller side room. He had no idea what would be the consequences of this interruption. Was this wedding truly off, or simply delayed? He honestly did not think he could ask Fadia to attempt this marriage again, not when she had made it clear that she was indeed being pushed into this. "What was that all about?" Ahmed pulled off his keffiyeh and rubbed a hand through his short, dark hair. Zaid folded his arms across his chest and leaned a shoulder against the wall. His expression mirrored that of the American businessman, unhappy and uneasy. "I don't know," Khalid said, "but somehow we are going to end up paying for it." A moment later, Sultan bin Mohammed Al-Qasimi burst through the door, slamming it shut behind him. He glanced from son to son, but spoke to Khalid.
"If you hadn't attracted so much attention on your last visit to America, this would not be happening. Your actions have brought dishonor upon our family, and a reporter to your wedding. You are not worthy of Mahmud's daughter. Not that he would have you for a son now, and now. Khalid lifted a hand. "And now your American business partners are most unhappy?" Khalid asked. The Sultan's face reddened. His mustache, thick and black, twitched. "They expressed sentiments that perhaps we should set a better example for our country. But they are not even remotely interested in a discussion of our traditions. So, that being said, and since it is obvious the bride I have chosen for you wishes to have nothing to do with you, you will now be forced to the other option."
Khalid stiffened. Father, I agreed to your choices. I made a choice."
"To marry? But you are not married, are you?"
Khalid shook his head. The cords holding his keffiyeh slapped at him. He knocked them back and faced father. "Then I will marry. I made my choice. I will not face banishment." The Sultan smoothed a hand over his face.
"And what choice will you make? An American wife?"
With a shrug, Khalid asked, "Why not? Perhaps." With a snort, the Sultan waved away such an idea.
"You will not. You will delay and make excuses. So, I give you 1 month. Only 1 month. You will be married then, or every bit of your inheritance will pass to your brother, Zaid. And I will not wish to see you again or call you my son."
Khalid shook his head and forced a hard smile. But father, I will not fail. That is my promise. A wife within the month, and this time I will choose." Chapter 2. Casey Connolly paced her cell, wishing she still had her cell phone, or at least a hot bath. Seriously, it had been 2 days without so much as even a mention of a lawyer or the American ambassador, and now she was starting to wonder if maybe she should have waited for that quote until after the wedding. But she wanted to see if the shock effect of her showing up would jar loose some honesty. It hadn't. She kicked at her cot, more angry with herself than anyone else. But she was willing to vent on someone else if she could. "Even prisoners of war are allowed to shower," she shouted. No one answered. She turned and continued her pacing. At least she could keep up with her exercise routine, but this wasn't much of a substitute for a 5-mile run. It also wasn't the first time she'd found herself jailed. As an investigative reporter, and an opinionated one at that, she'd often had to call her boss, Luke Reynolds, to bail her out. But she hadn't been able to make a call, and he wouldn't start worrying about her for a few more days. Facing the door, she called out, "I'm an American citizen, and I know damn well Sharjah signed the Geneva Convention." A smooth, confident voice answered from the hall. But you are not a prisoner of war. In fact, I dare say that no one even knows that you are here." A tall man with broad shoulders stepped around the corner and into view. He stopped on the other side of the bars and gave her an appraising stare. She offered one back. He had on the Sharjah traditional white robes and headscarf. Of course, she recognized him at once. She'd seen his photo in more than one gossip rag. Sheikh Khalid Al-Qasimi, the Sultan of Sharjah's eldest son, was a man with a playboy reputation for trouble, and it was his wedding she'd crashed. Funny, he didn't look unhappy with her. Nor did he really fit the role of dissolute rogue. His face seemed so youthful. Smooth, tan skin left him looking more like his early 20s, not his early 30s. A closely cropped black beard marked a very square jaw, and when he smiled, his teeth looked movie star white. He had a wide mouth with a lower lip she'd call sinful, and it was only those chocolate brown eyes that put her on her guard. The man knew he was charming, and was being so right now. "Why? I'm a prisoner of love instead?" His mouth quirked. Casey's face heated. She waved a hand at him. "Sorry to bust in on your wedding. I just wanted a quote." One of his dark eyebrows lifted. She noticed they were arched high in the middle and black as sin. "Your little outburst, Casey Connolly, left me in more than my usual amount of trouble." He leaned against the wall in front of her cell, his casual posture at odds with a situation that was, Casey had to admit, headed to dire. Reporters had been known to disappear into Middle Eastern prisons for a very long time. She tilted her head and studied his face, trying to figure out just what he wanted from her. Because he must want something, even if it was only to gloat that she was behind bars. However, he didn't seem the gloating type. He did look like trouble on two legs. Those dark eyes, bedroom eyes she'd call them, raked a stare over her body, his gaze moving slowly as if he was enjoying the view. She thought about stepping closer to let him enjoy the smell, eau de prison cell and 2 days of sweat. But she wanted out, and this guy might be her key to that. He swept a courtly bow that might have been ridiculous if anyone else had done that. "I'm Sheikh Khalid Al-Qasimi." "As if I didn't know. What, you think I'd crash just anyone's wedding?" She crossed her arms. "Now can I call the American embassy so we can clear up this misunderstanding?" He shook his head, and the ends of his headscarf swayed. "It is not a misunderstanding when you violate a private ceremony against the expressed wishes of the Sultan of Sharjah. And this is not America. Our laws are quite different." Dropping her arms to her sides, she chewed on her lower lip. Was it better to go damsel in distress or stay a reporter who knew her stuff? Sharjah might not be the most forward-looking of countries, but it also wasn't backwater. They had a lot of ties to American businesses, which was why she'd targeted them for a quote from one of the CEOs. She lifted her head and told him, "Do you really want to escalate this into an international incident? And that's after the bad press you already earned? What did they call you? The sulky sheik? The Sultan's sorry son?" He winced, but waved aside her remarks. "As you note, honor does matter in Sharjah. Your actions interrupted my wedding and humiliated the bride." Casey bit down on her lower lip again. She let out a breath. "About that, I am sorry if your bride's angry. But honestly, she seemed a nice girl, and too nice to be pushed into something without her express consent." "Oh, she won't be. The wedding is, as you Americans might say, off." Casey blinked and held still, cutting off the urge to pump a fist into the air and shout, "Yes!" That would be rude. Something, however, must have showed up in her eyes, for Khalid shook his head. "My father is undecided what to do about you. He may simply forget about you. If that happens, there's no telling how long you'll stay in here." He waved a hand at the iron bars, the concrete walls and floor. Sharjah was certainly modern with its ideas of prisons being a lot of hard surfaces. "You're bluffing," Casey said. "Your father has far too many connections to American businesses to risk sanctions or worse." Khalid shrugged. It seemed an elegant gesture, smooth and practiced, but Casey couldn't help noticing his eyes had darkened. It was possible he was as upset with her as his father must be. From what she'd seen, the bride had been a lovely girl. Staring at him, she lifted her chin and cut to the chase. "You're not here to tell me all this, so just what do you want?" She could have sworn she saw a shift in his expression, a quirk of his lips and those arched eyebrows that betrayed what seemed irritation. Over what? Before she could figure it out, He asked, "I wish to know why did you crash my wedding?" Turning her head to one side, she chewed on her lower lip. Did she go for honesty? Or something that might get her out of here? Giving up, she was a damn poor liar. She waved a hand at him. "Look, yours wasn't the first arranged wedding I've been to. I've seen girls shoved into matches with rich old men, and women obviously terrified to say no, or so unhappy that you could feel it in the room. But yours was high profile. A story about a dozen women sold by their family into virtual slavery gets a few lines of page 5 and people going tisk tisk, but—" "The Sultan's sulky son. Is that what you said I was named? I will get front page. Yes?" Talking faster now, she spread her hands wide and said, "I've read about your exploits. I figured if anyone could bring a spotlight onto this wrong, it would be you. Well, actually, it would be your notoriety." "I am so happy to see you are an honest woman. Did you even think of the shame you could bring down on Fadia and her family?" She stiffened. "Frankly, no. I figured I was saving her." "From a fate worse than death. Fadia would one day have been Sultana." She propped a hand on her hip. "And maybe she didn't even want that? Anyone ever ask her what she wanted? Did you even meet her before the ceremony?" A blush reddened his cheeks slightly, but again he brushed away her words with an impatient swipe of one long-fingered hand. No man should have hands that elegant, Casey decided. And then she tried to focus on his words. "Possible to arrange your release without having to involve your embassy or any official paperwork." She blinked. How? Do you have a magic carpet?" He stared at her. She lifted one shoulder. "Sorry, bad joke." "Well, this is not. If you were my fiancé, I could have you immediately given into my custody." She stared at him for a long moment. The urge to laugh welled in her chest, but he sounded serious about that. She shook her head. "I've heard of some lame pickup lines, but that... You want me to step into that poor girl's shoes? I've seen how little respect women get in Sharjah. Thanks, but no thanks." Khalid folded his arms over what was, she noticed, a very broad chest. "You think you do not, what is the phrase, owe me? I made a promise to my father, and in my world honor matters more than riches, to marry. You have ruined my chances for that, leaving me in what you might call a tight spot. If you pose as my fiancé, not only do you repair what you have done to insult me, it is possible my father will see an American bride, one outspoken as you, is not a daughter he wishes to add to the family. He will release me from my promise, I will be free, and so will you." It sounded too damn simple. Casey didn't think for one moment that she should trust him. He was smiling again, that charming little boy-lost quirk of the mouth with eyes that were imploring her to see his side of things. Oh yeah, this was his plan all right, and one that could end with her in even deeper trouble. On the other hand, his dad really could keep her locked up and unable to reach out to anyone who could help her. That would prevent any American businesses from having to back away from Sharjah deals. But she wasn't ready to jump into this farce. Not yet. Shaking her head, she said, "And what do I get from this?" Pushing off the wall, he faced her. "Your freedom is not enough? You are not exactly in a position to make demands." "Oh, I think I am. Your dad runs this country, meaning you can get me in anywhere. I could get a story on the inside of an arranged marriage, an interview with Fadia even. I'll pose as your fiancé, and you help me get a story that's Pulitzer-worthy." "Very well. You have my word. Now, is there anything else? Money, perhaps?" He sounded so smug. Her palm itched to slap the smile off his handsome face. "Let's get one thing clear. I'm not a bride you can buy or barter for, Buster." He laughed, and Casey hated that she liked that low, rich sound. "It will not be that much of a hardship to pose as the fiancé of the son of a sultan." Casey shook her head. "Excuse me, but I've been through my sister getting married. I know just how much work those damn things are. Even a fake one's going to take up more time than I want to give it. But if I get the story—"
"That is the spirit. Find the positive side of this situation. I've been searching for it myself."
He lifted a hand and snapped his fingers. For a moment, Casey wondered what that was about. But of course there would be cameras. A guard showed up at once, keys jingling. He unlocked the cell and pulled open the door. Gingerly, Casey stepped out, half expecting this to be a joke. Khalid would lift his hand again and she'd be tossed back into the cell and he'd laugh. Instead, he only looked her up and down and shook his head.
"We can do something about your clothes when we get to the palace."
A hot shower with lots of soap suddenly sounded like the best idea in the world. She glanced at Khalid. "I'm going to need my passport back, and my cell phone, and my things from the hotel, and my computer." Khalid smiled at her, which left her uneasy.
"Your things, as you call them, are here, in impound. Now, shall we go?"
He put a hand on the small of her back, gestured for her to walk with him. The small voice in her head that always told her she was about to do something dumb right before she did it was yelling just now. She silently admonished it. Not like she had much choice here. Besides, she had the inside track right now on a story that could push her from just another reporter to a byline that carried clout. For that, she could put up with being a pretend fiancé. And it was going to be more than interesting to hear what the Sultan of Sharjah thought of all this. Chapter 3. She'd seen rich before, but not on the level of Sultan of Sharjah's palace. From just inside the gates that led into the palace grounds, she could see rows of tall palm trees, hedges that separated lush gardens from the driveway, and a white, sprawling structure, 3 stories of stairs, columns, windows, and balconies. The architecture seemed very traditional to Casey, mirroring what she'd seen elsewhere in Sharjah, but this was on a far more lavish scale. The chauffeur stopped the limo in front of the wide steps that looked to lead to the main entrance. Glancing over, she caught Khalid watching her. She was glad her mouth wasn't hanging open like some country girl. "So this is where you live." She tried to make the words sound casual, as if marble steps, wrought iron, and doors trimmed in gold didn't impress her much.
"Where we live," Khalid corrected.
He smiled. "Oh yeah, well, so not sharing a bedroom with you." But the thought led to an image of Khalid naked, all that beautiful tan skin on display, and all those muscles. She hadn't missed that under the robes the man had strength in his arms and moved with athletic grace. She turned and got out of the car without waiting for the chauffeur to jump to it. The man gave Khalid an apologetic look, but Khalid only slipped from the limo and stood next to her. Standing at the bottom of the steps and looking up at the palace, she was starting to think of Disney movies and every princess story she'd ever watched with her sister when they were little. Truth be told, she'd always thought of herself of more a Princess Tiana type, all that good Cajun food and Nolans as a backdrop, but Khalid was definitely no frog. Khalid put his hand on the small of her back again, seemed to be a habit with him, and said, "Come, Casey Connolly, I will show you to your room. Then I will leave to get ready for tonight, when you will meet the Sultan." Do we really have to do that tonight? She'd been hoping for a shower and bed and a few hours starting to shape up her story. She also had to call Luke and fill him in on what had happened. He stared at her as if expecting her to take this, and everything else, in stride. And okay, maybe that was a compliment.
"You should be excited," he insisted. "There has not been a reporter within our house. Not ever."
Right. Excited. Happy to be engaged. Are we really going to pull this off? He smiled at her and led the way up the steps, taking hold of her hand now. The front door towered like something out of a castle, arch included. Khalid let go of her hand to open the door for her, and she was a little surprised to see a blend of lavish and modern. Marble floors, towering ceilings, columns, but also comfortable furniture, clean lines, and carpets that had to be worth a fortune. Khalid led the way up a set of stairs to the right to the second floor, down another hall, and she noticed the entire place seemed scented, as if incense or the flowers from the garden spilled inside. It was cooler inside. either great and quiet air conditioning or really thick walls. Halfway down the hallway, Khalid stopped and opened another door. She peeked in and saw it looked like any New York upscale apartment. Emphasis on upscale. You didn't get garden views like this in New York. She stepped in, taking in what seemed to be a sitting room. She'd never seen so much white. Couch, pillows, tables, doors. The door on the left stood ajar, showing a bedroom also done up with a lot of white. But right now she was just hoping now for a bathroom that matched the rest of the luxury. Thick carpets with intricate designs covered marble floors, and French doors opened onto a balcony that overlooked the gardens. In the distance, she could see more of the palace and then the skyline of Sharjah's capital. Khalid waved to the phone by the couch and said, "If you need anything, call the staff. Everyone speaks excellent English." She shot him a sideways glance. "You have room service?" Khalid shrugged. "You cannot yell loud enough for anyone to hear you in another part of the palace, so we have phones. I will be back in an hour. There are a choice of dresses for you in the closet. I picked out what would be suitable for you to wear when you meet my father." She frowned. "What's wrong with my clothes?" His stare traveled over her, and her cheeks heated. "Okay, so I didn't bring anything formal, or even half formal. What about my luggage?" "Already awaits you. Now, I see you in an hour, Casey." Somehow he made her name into almost an endearment, seeming to caress the vowels, making them longer. Her face heated even more. With one of his slight bows, he closed the door, leaving her alone in what was essentially a private apartment. "If only Ma could see me now," Casey muttered, and started poking around. She had an hour, so 20 minutes for a shower, 10 to dress and do makeup. She never put on much. She found a small kitchen, a fridge stocked with coconut water, yogurt, and fresh fruit. Wandering into the bedroom, she glanced around, found the closet, and opened it. She had 3 choices, none of which she'd ever buy for herself. They all looked expensive, and she was betting on designer labels. She plucked out a blue gown, long-sleeved and almost floor-length. Gold embroidery decorated the hem, sleeves, and neckline. "How did I end up in this fantasy world?" she muttered and ran her hand over the silk. Laying the dress out on the bed, she noticed her lumpy canvas backpack sitting on the dresser. Her life was inside that bag. Heading over to it, she zipped it open and checked for her passport. Missing, meaning Khalid was making sure she couldn't run out on him, not that she would, and looked for her phone. It showed missed calls from Luke, but she didn't bother listening to them. It'd be faster to talk to him. He answered on the second ring. "Casey?" He sounded like always, out of breath, harried, and impatient. She'd always told him he was going to have a heart attack one of these days, but Luke would probably be around another 60 years, running his magazine, Real News, just as he did now. He was one of the rare publisher editors around. He could also be a pain in the ass and demanding as hell, but she knew how to deal with him. "Luke, I only have a few minutes. Where have you been? Don't tell me jail. Are you in trouble again?" "It's a story. Not that long, but definitely great." "Define great. And what did you do this time?" "Let's just say it's gotten me into the Sultan's palace, and I'm looking at getting an exclusive insider interview." "What? With Muhammad Al-Qasimi?" "The one and only. And with his son, Sheikh Khalid. I'm going to blow open Sharjah's tradition of arranged marriages, and I'm going to nab an interview with Khalid's former fiancée." Luke laughed. "Former? Well, that's news right there. Only you, Casey. When you get in, you get in. Go big or go home, right?" "Well, Big has a deadline. Are you going to get me my story in time for the next edition?" Luke asked. "That's—" Her phone beeped a warning. "Hey, my phone is about to die and I don't want to use the palace phones. No telling who's listening. I'll get back to you as soon as I can with deadlines." "Case, you—" The phone cut out, which was just as well. Luke was probably going to warn her to be careful, or tell her he wouldn't bail her out if she ended back in jail, or give her some other sage advice she wouldn't want to hear and wouldn't remember to follow. Pulling out her charger, she got her phone plugged in. She was short on time now. Grabbing her toiletry bag, she hurried into the bathroom. She shouldn't be surprised by more opulence, but really, a standing shower, gold fixtures, and the most amazing bathtub that looked large enough for two. An image flashed of her relaxing in the tub with Khalid. Frowning, she turned on the water and cleared her mind of that distracting thought. This was about a story for her, and her somehow getting out of his dad's plans for him. Hot water washed away the sweat of the 2 days. The heat also loosened a few over-tense muscles. It had not been fun being dragged out of the wedding, and she'd strained a few muscles. Her anxiety about maybe not getting out of this scrape faded, and she started thinking about the story. What angle should she take? Sultan's son reforms, changes his mind about arranged marriages? Or should she stick with Fadia's story, how a woman found the courage to walk away from the sheikh she'd been promised to? Stepping out of the shower, she grabbed one of the huge white towels, sinfully thick, and wrapped it around her body. She walked into the bedroom and stood in front of the dress. Okay, so the dress was amazing. That didn't mean Khalid wasn't raised in the traditions of his family. He'd been willing to marry a girl just because his father told him to. And, okay, so she didn't know all his reasons, but still, she had to remember he was a guy who didn't know a damn thing about women or the rights of women. But he sure knew clothes. Fingering the silk again, she wondered what she was going to wear underneath. She didn't have anything that seemed suitable. Sports bras and cotton boy briefs were going to show up like lumps under this fabric. Time to see if Khalid really has thought of everything, or had someone do it for him. Heading to the dresser, she pulled open the top drawer and found an array of beautiful silk underwear in a variety of sizes. She could have her pick. She had to hand it to Khalid. He was on top of things. Or he had one killer staff working for him. She was just struggling with the zipper in back when a knock came at the door. Chapter 4. Casey opened the door wearing the dress Khalid had hoped she would choose. She had been attractive before, but this was a woman of beauty. The blue suited her perfectly, showing her dazzling eyes. While the high neckline and long sleeves covered her shoulders and cleavage, the dress conformed to the shape of her body, and a lovely body it was. "Beautiful," he told her. She offered a nod as if she had been told such a thing before. "Thank you. You look, well, handsome sounds a little lame. You'd think a journalist could come up with something more appropriate." Khalid smoothed the lapels of his suit. Armani and custom and rather expensive, but he'd gone formal. His father would expect nothing less. Stepping into the room, he closed the door behind him. "We need to go over a few things before you meet my father." She had stepped back, and now she held up one hand. "I'll warn you now, I want no part in outright lies." "Oh, that is not to be thought of. My father would know when you are lying to him." She groaned, headed to the couch and sat down. Heading to the other side, Khalid sat down and leaned his elbows on his thighs. "He must recognize you. How can he not? So he will ask how this happened. It is very simple. After you were arrested, I went down to the police station. I had already admired your courage and your beauty, and we started talking." "And then he's going to ask what we talked about." He frowned. "We will tell him the truth. We spoke of my family, and the fact that I no longer was engaged. And then we will show him that despite how sudden this is, that we fell instantly in love." Casey laughed. "Seriously? He's going to buy that?" He straightened, then leaned toward her. Her eyes widened, but she did not move away. "The truth is I am attracted to you. Will you deny that you feel the spark between us?" Looking away, she cleared her throat. But she glanced back. She smelled of soap and nothing more. This, he decided, had to be the most direct woman he had ever met. She wore no makeup, or so little he could not see it. But she needed none. Sooty lashes swept down over her eyes, and then she looked directly at him. "Spark doesn't mean forever love." "Ah, but we just need to worry my father enough that he releases me from my promise to marry. He does not dislike Americans, but you are a different story, given that you disrupted his plans." Taking her hand, He reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring he had selected. He slipped it onto her finger. Eyes huge, she pulled her hand away and held it up. The solitary diamond caught the light, reflecting back a rainbow of colors. "This has to be the biggest stone I've ever seen." Her voice cracked slightly. "This is your engagement ring. You must have one. And you can be truthful when you say I asked you to marry me right there in prison." Casey took a deep breath and settled both hands in her lap. "How do I get my part of the deal, the story, if he throws me straight out of the palace tonight?" Khalid smiled and stood. "Such poor manners would be a breach of honor to him. That will never happen. You are safe for tonight, and perhaps a few days more. But once he sees you will never give up your reporter habits. Then things will change." He held out his hand. "And now we must not be late." She stood and took his hand. She had lovely hands, he decided, delicate with long, shapely fingers. Heading down the stairs, Casey leaned close and asked, "Does your father know you're bringing a new fiancée to dinner?" Khalid shrugged. "Does it matter? He will know soon enough. But do not worry so much. My brothers will be there, as will a few relatives." "A few?" Letting go of her hand, he opened the doors into the dining room. Casey gave a small gasp. He could hardly blame her. The Sultan preferred formal dinners. The more relatives gathered, the better. Tonight both Ahmed and Zaid sat at the table. Both sat up as they spotted Casey. Khalid had not told either of his brothers of his plans. It was best for them to be able to say they knew nothing of this if it all went wrong. It was also best if Casey knew nothing as well. 2 of his uncles, 3 aunts, and several cousins also sat at the long table or stood nearby, which was good. It meant dinner had not formally begun. Conversation seemed to die. The Sultan turned and his expression soured. As usual, he had worn less formal tan robes to dinner, without the traditional keffiyeh. He still had most of his hair, but he preferred to cut it short. His temper looked equally short, for his face reddened and he turned to face Khalid.
"What is this woman doing here?"
Forcing a smile, it was best his father did not see the sweat starting to trickle down his spine. Khalid took Casey's hand. He could feel her fingers tremble, but he didn't know if that was from anger at such an insult or fear. Striding across the vast room, he stood in front of his father, smiled at his father, and said, "She is gracing us with her beauty, and also with the joy of agreeing to be my bride." His father's face reddened even more. Someone spit out a drink. Khalid heard the sputter, but he kept his stare on his father's face and the man's darkening eyes. The Sultan glanced from Casey and back to Khalid.
"When I said you must marry, I did not mean—"
"Mean what, father? That I should not instantly fall in love? At the jail we spoke. I had already admired Casey's courage. I found even more to draw me to her." Lifting the hand he held, he kissed her skin. Casey's face flushed, which pleased him. Turning back to his father, he said, "I once would have mocked falling in love at just one sight or two, but I will tell you this. I intend to make this woman my bride. I am doing just as you ordered. I found a bride." The Sultan looked her up and down. He glanced again at Khalid.
"Will she make you a dutiful wife?"
Before Khalid could reply, Casey said, "One of the things Khalid has said he admires in me is my independence. But you can rest assured on one point, Sultan Al-Qasimi. When it comes to your son, I will do what is best for both of us." It was a fair answer, Khalid decided. Shrewd as well, for he suspected it to be the utter truth. Turning to stare at her, the Sultan stroked his beard and at last turned away. With a wave of his hand, he ordered,
"Dinner! Be seated."
Khalid relaxed a fraction, until he caught Zaid shaking his head and Ahmed rolling his eyes. He might be able to fool his father with this idea of instant love, but he was not certain his brothers would ever believe such a thing. Putting a hand on the small of Casey's back, he guided her to the far end of the table, well away from his father. He pulled a chair out for her, seating her next to an aunt who spoke no English, was terribly deaf, and who loved her food. Casey smiled up at him and gave him a wink. He couldn't fight the surge of pride at having such a bold and beautiful woman at his side. The dinner became essentially an interview. His father sent some dishes back to the kitchen and ordered others. Khalid knew his father was out to test this potential bride. His family might well disapprove of her if she offended by turning down any dish. The shawarma was sent back, replaced with roast lamb's head. Al-haris, a pasty dish of wheat and meat, traditional for weddings, came out to replace the salad and hummus. Al-mahbus came out, but Khalid knew it would look odd to Western eyes, for it seemed a mess of dark brown meat and white rice. Thankfully, there was no time for stuffed camel to be cooked and presented, and Casey seemed uncaring of anything pushed onto her plate. But while Casey might have had his deaf aunt on one side and himself on the other, Zaid sat across from her, and he asked, "How do you like Sharjah?" The implication was clear. She had gone from the jail to the palace, and Zaid fixed Casey with a hard, questioning stare. She returned the look and simply answered, "The land is very beautiful." Khalid's mouth twitched. The land, not the people or the buildings. From the end of the table, the Sultan spoke up.
"Khalid must show you the sights of Sharjah. We are proud of our cities and our culture."
He fixed a hard look on Khalid, and Khalid caught a warning in his father's eyes. Khalid fought back a smile. This was just what he had wanted, his father to be unhappy with this woman for a bride. Leaning back, Khalid let the meal take its course. More food came out, and Zaid glanced at Khalid and then asked Casey, "You are a journalist, yes? What brought you to Sharjah, other than the opportunity to disrupt a wedding, that is?" Casey almost choked on her water. Khalid patted her back and stared at his younger brother. "Must work be discussed at dinner?" Zaid shrugged, and Casey simply said, "I've been covering arranged marriages and the impact of a growing international women's rights movement. I'd be interested in interviewing Fadia, in fact, to get her side of the story." The Sultan almost choked on his food. He glanced from Khalid to Casey.
"I understand you have your own opinions on the matter. I believe my son shares some of your views. He is more modern than I, but I have allowed him to choose his bride."
Khalid saw Casey stiffen. While he wished his father to call off any wedding, he did not want a family war started. He turned to Zaid and asked after the business deal pending with 2 American companies bidding on offshore drilling rights. The Sultan overheard the question, and it was enough to divert his attention. Business usually did. Frowning, Casey turned to pick at her food. The rest of the meal passed quickly. Casey offered no other comments, and when conversation drifted back into Arabic, it became clear she knew nothing of the local language. That left her isolated, making it clear how distant she was from any other woman at the table. Khalid almost wished he could do something to draw her back into the conversation, but this was what he wanted, to show his father that Casey was not a wise choice of bride, so that his father would simply tell Khalid not to marry for a time. Dinner ended when the Sultan rose and left the room. Ahmed and Saeed gave Khalid long looks. Promising questions would be coming soon, but Khalid had every intention of ducking that ordeal for as long as he could. He escorted Casey back to her room, and when he had the door closed behind him, he told her, "That went well." She stared at him. "Really? I had the impression your father would like to put me on the next plane out of here. And what is with your brothers? I could swear they know this is a fake." Khalid shrugged. "Zaid always asks too many questions, but he and Ahmed will not make trouble for me." "And what about my interviews? The sooner I can get them in, the better. This isn't going to last all that long." He held up his hand to keep her from saying more. "In due time. Tomorrow we have another event hosted by my father for his American business partners. You and I will attend. The whole family will be there. I would just as soon have that event go well for my father, but I will see about arranging your interviews as soon as I can." Casey shook her head. "I need a date. My editor has a deadline, and I've got to tell him more than soon." Coming over to her, Khalid took her hand in his. "Tomorrow we schedule things? For tonight, sleep well." The impulse rose, and he did not question it. She was a lovely woman, and he found her attractive. Leaning down, he kissed the corner of her mouth. She stiffened, and he wondered if she was alarmed or interested. Pulling back, he could see confusion in her eyes, as if she did not know what to do about this attraction between them. He did. He put his arm around her and started to pull her close, but her cell phone rang. She pulled away. "That's probably my editor. I've got to take his call. I'll see you tomorrow." Turning, she headed for the bedroom and her phone call. He was more than tempted to follow her, but he also knew the danger of letting this attraction grow out of hand. He wanted her to be a woman his father would dismiss as unworthy of any man of the family. He did not want a wife. Turning, he headed out of her room, and he kept trying not to picture the allure of her hips as she had walked away from him. No, she was a woman meant to do away with the idea of Khalid having to marry. He was not going to give in to the allure of her charms and make this romance into something real. The next day, Khalid intentionally avoided Casey. He buried himself in business calls and paperwork and email. However, he could not avoid thinking of her. Was she bored in the palace? Was she writing? Or pacing her room? 5 different times he almost asked one of the servants what she was doing. 4 times he caught himself heading toward her room and had to turn his steps back to his office. He thought of taking lunch with her in the gardens, but instead took his meal in his office. Such a plan backfired on him, however, when his father stopped by and gave an approving nod.
"If this is the influence an American girl has on you to work harder, I approve."
His father smiled, turned, and walked out. And Khalid knew he was going to have to not be so consumed by business. He wanted his father to get the idea of marriage out of his mind, not to think that Casey was reforming Khalid's playboy ways. The event that evening was to take place in the gardens. The Sultan had asked for traditional dress. Khalid intentionally chose a black suit and white shirt, leaving off even the formality of a tie. He sent to Casey a request for her to wear the red gown he had chosen for her. It was not the least traditional. Oh, it covered her skin, but when she stepped from her room, he saw it did just what he had hoped. The long red dress showed off her curves. The skirt flowed loosely around her legs, but the top hugged her thin waist and the swell of her breasts. Khalid smiled. She looked very American with her golden hair loose and her pale skin. With his hand resting at the small of her back, he escorted her down the stairs. "Did you have a good day?" he asked. She lifted one shoulder. "More like a long call last night giving excuses to my editor about not having a deadline or an interview lined up. And then a long day of writer's block. Khalid, it's hard to write a story if you don't know what the story is. I need some interviews." He nodded. "Tomorrow, I promise. I will arrange all." They stepped into the gardens. Small white lights had been strung in the trees. Candles in lanterns floated in the 3 different fountains. Food had been set out in one area. A band played traditional instruments in another, and the air smelled of scented flowers, jasmine and honeysuckle.
"There she is,"
the Sultan said, coming to meet them. He glanced at Khalid's casual dress and frowned, but Casey stepped forward and said, "Masa el-Khir." For a moment, the Sultan seemed taken aback that she had spoken Arabic, but his mustache twitched and he gave a nod.
"Good evening. It is good to see you learn a few words."
He waved impatiently for Khalid.
"Come, I have told everyone they are to meet my son's bride-to-be."
Khalid took Casey's hand and escorted her around the gardens. He lost track of the number of hands shaken. Most of the guests he knew already. The crowd was mostly men and mostly American. Casey seemed to become more a reporter than a person. She could not, it seemed, resist asking questions. "What do you think of Sharjah's stance on women's rights? Do you think Sharjah should be sanctioned until it does away with forced marriages? Have you ever thought of using your business ties to Sharjah to enforce a change in how women are treated?" The questions would have pleased him, if his father had been close enough to overhear. Instead, he got startled glances from the businessmen. Some excused themselves with the protest this was an evening off. Others just glanced at Khalid and walked away, and some frowned and told Casey a blunt, no comment. Grabbing Casey's hand, he pulled her over to one of the refreshment tables, one laden with sparkling water and a punch bowl. "This would be wonderful if you were doing all of this within my father's hearing." He handed her a glass of punch. She took it and put it down again. "I'm not a pretend reporter. That's my profession. This is what I do." "You are doing an excellent job at making our American business partners uncomfortable." "It's our now, not your father's. I was honest with you when I said I was here to get a story." Khalid let out a long breath. "And I was honest with you when I said I would arrange interviews, but now and here is not the place." Her mouth pulled down, and he noticed then the stubborn tilt to her jaw. He took her hand and stepped closer. "Please, can you not just be a woman tonight?" The corners of her mouth twitched. "That line work for you before?" He let go of her hand. "That was not a line." "It sounded like one to me. But I'll make you a deal. No more questions tonight. But you guarantee me either an interview with your father or with Fadia tomorrow." He shook his head. "Tomorrow I can guarantee you a date for such a thing. Will that please you?" She stuck out her hand. "Deal." He took her hand as if to shake it, but then turned her hand over and kissed the inside of her wrist. "Deal. Now let us see if you can enjoy this evening and stop threatening disaster. I am hoping our American partners will be more forgiving if you now become charming." "Can I still ask the hard question if your father is around?" Khalid had to grin. "You never give up, do you?" She glanced up at him. "It's one of the things you admire about me." They spent the next 2 hours mingling. While a few men found reasons to be other places when they approached, Casey turned on the smiles and changed her questions to casual ones. "Do you find it challenging to work with international companies? Is language a barrier to making deals? What do you think of the lobster and the smoked salmon?" It worked. She charmed the men, swapped recipes with the few women attending the event, smoothing over most of the feathers she had ruffled. It was sad that he could not turn her loose as a reporter. That would have ended his father's marriage plans, but it also would have ended too many business relationships. He could not endanger his country's economy in such a fashion. Besides, if he was to get Casey her interview, he needed his father pleased, and it seemed he had at least accomplished that much. When he noticed Casey's smile beginning to sag and her shoulders starting to droop, he asked, "Are you ready to leave?" "More than," she told him. She lifted her skirt and headed for the stairs that led to her apartment, but Khalid caught her elbow and moved with her toward the front doors. "Not that way. This way. For I have a better idea of how we may spend the rest of the night." Chapter 5. Casey braced herself. She'd been doing research most of the day, digging into Khalid's past, or at least everything the tabloids had written on him. He was, by all accounts, the playboy sheik, the man no woman could resist, and a man who loved life. She'd known most of it, but she hadn't really dug into the details. No wonder his father wanted him married. Khalid looked to be on a path to becoming a permanent bachelor. Not that he didn't have his good side. Khalid donated and supported several charities. He never turned down an invitation to one of their events, which was great for fundraising and probably for partying. But all those headlines had left Casey wary. What had she gotten herself into here? And just what was he proposing now? Nightclubs? Running off to some hotel for a night of what? Her heart thudded into her ribs. Her breath shortened, and she didn't know if she wanted to find an excuse or an excuse to go with him. Her Midwestern side was coming out full force. She was in over her head with this guy. Stammering out the words and pulling back, she told him, "Khalid, I'm a little tired. Whatever bright idea you have, can it wait until tomorrow?" "Just trust me," Khalid insisted, pulling her with him. He flashed a smile, and she tried to relax, but that smile would lure any woman to her doom. "Hurry, before we're spotted and delayed." He got her outside the front doors, paused there, and waved at one of the staff nearby. Wasn't there always someone standing around here at the palace, just waiting for orders? She had no idea what time it was, But the moon was still up, and the night had just started to cool. Stars glittered overhead in a way she hadn't seen in years due to city lights. The limo's engine rumbled to life, and headlights flipped on. Rubbing her arms, she asked, "Where are you taking me?" "You'll see." His grin lit the night, all white teeth and charm. She shook her head. "If this is some—" His laugh interrupted. The sound shot a warmth through her she wasn't sure she should be feeling. "Trust me, you will enjoy this." She huffed out a breath and muttered, "Question is, will I regret it?" The limo pulled up, a shiny black Mercedes. Someone else came forward to open the car door. Khalid took her hand and led her down the steps. "Are we sneaking me out of your father's palace?" Casey asked. Smiling, Khalid leaned forward and told the driver, "Medmen, muntajay sihi." Casey chewed her lower lip. She'd started a crash course in Arabic. No way was she ever getting caught at another dinner party without being able to at least follow the conversation. But these words hadn't been part of the basic vocabulary. "Okay, is that a nightclub, a bar, or—" "Medmen is the finest spa in my country. The waters are said to be healing, and I think we could both use a massage." "That's not code for something else, is it?" she asked. He shook his head. "Why so suspicious? Is my reputation really so terrible?" "Do you really want me to answer that?" Khalid shook his head, took her hand and squeezed it gently. "No, I do not. But I assure you, this is to thank you for a wonderful evening. Nothing more." Pulling her hand away, she wasn't sure if she wanted to be happy or sorry about that. The limo sped down the streets, into the city, and then out again on one of the highways. Glancing out the window, she could only see the desert as white sand and dark shadows. Glancing over at Khalid, she told him, "I'm sorry." "Why should you apologize?" "For being such a reporter earlier. I don't get out much. My work is pretty much my life." The corner of his mouth lifted. "My life has been all play. Yours has been all work, it seems. Does that make us the perfect couple?" "You mean maybe we could find a balance in between? I don't know about that. Habits are easy to form, hard to break." He shook his head. "I would not like you so much if you were not so... difficult? Hard-headed? My mom used to call me stubborn as two mules hitched to the same plow." He grinned. "And I have been called a peacock with lovely plumage and no use at all." Casey relaxed and smiled. "Was that by your dad or your mom?" Soon as the words had slipped out, she bit down on her lower lip. "Sorry, I wasn't thinking. I read your mom died when you were pretty young. That must have been hard." He looked out the window. "No, but it made my father a hard man. The world would be different if my mother had lived." They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it took no more than a few minutes before the limo exited the highway and drove down a palm-lined street to stop in front of a modern building. Casey stepped out of the limo and into a warm desert breeze. The spa seemed all stark lines of concrete and glass, but Khalid came around and took her hand, leading her inside. It surprised her the place would be open this late. But maybe Khalid being a sheik and all had some pull, or maybe this was a 24/7 kind of place. 2 women and 2 men met them in the lobby, which had a restful fountain and music like she'd heard earlier, some kind of stringed instrument and a drum. She followed the 2 women into a separate area that seemed to be a changing room with lockers, mirrors, and what looked like a full makeup and hair salon. The women spoke excellent English, got her out of her dress and into a thick white Turkish robe and sandals. After that, it was a shower, and then the women led her into a smaller room with a massage table. She stretched out, and the women set to work on her body, unknotting every kink she knew about and a few she didn't know she had. All that hard prison time. She had to smile at the idea. The scent of spiced oil left her half asleep, but the women left, and Casey roused herself. One of the 2 doors into the room had been left open. Sitting up, she grabbed her robe, dragged it on, and headed into the next space, which looked more like a private oasis. Glancing around, she saw Khalid, half naked and sitting in a huge sunken tiled tub. Several other tubs dotted the area, but only the one next to Khalid steamed from the hot water piped into it. They were still inside, but glancing up she could see stars and the moon through a skylight. Candles glowed from niches set into the walls. More palms and other potted plants had been artfully placed to make the room seem a lush oasis. She glanced around, looking for the spa attendants, but it seemed as if they'd been left alone. She clutched at the throat of her robe, but Khalid only smiled and waved at the waters bubbling around him.
"Come, I'm not some wild leopard who will leap onto you as if you were a tasty gazelle."
Khalid found her modesty charming. He'd been around too many models who thought nothing of being naked, so much so that at times he thought nothing of it as well. And the actresses he had dated had always wanted to display the latest sculpting of their bodies by their plastic surgeons. It had, he had to admit, grown tiresome. Casey, standing there in her bulky white robe, seemed far more alluring. Covering his eyes with his hands, he told her, "I will not peek, and the water will preserve your modesty. The waters are also said to be healing, and I will add you have your own tub." He heard the rustle of cloth, and a small gasp and splash. He peeked only a little, parting his fingers enough to see a flash of pale skin, a glimpse of her full breasts, and then she was under the water, her hair floating around her and steam rising up to bathe her face. "Okay, I'm in. You can look." He pulled his hand down.
"I told you you would enjoy this."
"Okay, you were right," she said, her voice drifting a little. "Thank you for bringing me here. I didn't realize I was so stressed."
"It has been a difficult time for everyone, and will probably be even more so over the next week or more," Khalid replied.
Leaning her head back, she stared up at the skylight and said, "I suppose, once you really get married, you will take over your father's business. Is that the plan?"
"I've been groomed for his position, yes. I will eventually assume his business interests as my own, but my father is in no rush to give up control to me. It is one of the great frustrations."
She gave a small hum. "He wants you to be responsible, but won't give you responsibilities. No wonder you lash out. You must have a lot of expectations to live up to that you never asked for."
He glanced at her. "I did not know you were a psychiatrist as well as a reporter."
She winced. "Ouch. Okay, maybe I asked for that." Turning to him, she pulled her arms out of the water and propped her chin on her fists. Her arms proved a distraction, all that smooth white skin on display. When he realized she had asked him a question, he had to ask her to repeat her words. "I said, what if you ever wanted to do something else? You know, be a pilot, or just open a restaurant or something like that."
"You Americans."
Khalid shook his head. He turned and faced her, copying her move, so he had his arms out of the water and his chin propped on his hands.
"Everyone wants to be a famous actor or a rock musician or something other than what they are meant to be. It's not like that here. Every son grows up in his father's shadow. The eldest is expected to learn the family trade. It is just that my family's business happens to be running a country and looking after affairs of state and an entire country's economy. Eventually, if all goes well, I may have sons, and I can let one of them become the Sultan. Then perhaps I might go into business for myself. That would be a true challenge."
"And that sounds like something you really want to do. Well, business is one thing I could help you with." He lifted an eyebrow and straightened.
"What do you know about business? You're a journalist."
"And just a woman, too," Casey said, but she sounded for once as if she was teasing. He splashed water at her and said,
"That's not what I meant. It's because of your field. What, did you cover business once upon a time?"
"That's how I got my start. And my family didn't just run a shop. My dad owned the best general store in Wisconsin and grew it into a giant mail order business. He also did well enough in stocks to send me to college. My sister, too, if she'd wanted it. He sold out to a larger company, and my folks retired to Florida. Over the years, I've learned a little." She winked at him. "Trust me." Khalid laughed. He turned, leaned his head back, and closed his eyes. "So, wise sage, what would you advise me?" "What kind of business were you thinking of going into? Camel exports? Sandcastle constructions?" Opening his eyes, he turned his head and stared at her. "Now you are mocking me. I haven't thought about something exact. I just have a sense that I could do something different. Everything around me is big. The family palace, the family business. It is all huge oil, banking, and the life of my country depends upon large profits. But I—" He trailed off, his face warm. "Go on," she said. He waved a hand. "I want something that could be mine. Something where what I do with my hands matters." Looking at her, he asked, "Do you think me crazy? The playboy who plays because he cannot do what he wants?" She sat up and said, "Open a restaurant." Khalid laughed. He turned to face her again. "There are so many of those around, I wouldn't stand a chance. And what do I know of food?" "You know a good time. That's what people want when they go out. You know how to be gracious. You could make it a place for young people to learn how to be great chefs. Make it a place to showcase your country's food. But you might want to leave out the sheep's head." She pulled a face. He shook his head. "Well, it is not as if I must decide today. There is time yet for me. After all, I do not plan to He cut off the words as one of the female attendants slipped into the room. Khalid cursed himself. He had almost said he did not plan to marry, and if that got back to his father, he was certain the Sultan would insist on this marriage going through no matter what. The attendant slipped up to Khalid's tub, bowed, and handed Khalid a message. It seemed the Sultan had called the limo's driver and had ordered Khalid's immediate return. "Is everything all right?" Casey asked. Muttering under his breath, Khalid tossed the note aside. He had no idea what was wrong, but something was. Standing, he hoisted himself out of the bath. The attendant held his robe for him. He wrapped it around him and then glanced at Casey. She was staring at him, eyes wide, lips parted, and it took every ounce of will not to strip off his robe and climb into her tub. She closed her mouth, and Khalid told her, "Dress. We must return to the palace. I think my father noticed we were missing." Chapter 6. Casey was having a hard time keeping focused. The image of Khalid naked, his skin glistening and all those muscles on display kept circling in her mind, teasing her, leaving her mouth dry and her pulse a little too fast. She'd figured him to be fit. She'd had no idea he'd be utterly stunning, with long legs and a lean body, and abs that would make any man jealous and any woman want to put her hands on him. Down, girl. She should focus on the fact that Khalid's father had hunted down Khalid for some reason. She didn't know what. Khalid seemed both tense and quiet on the drive back, and she couldn't blame him. So far, her take on the Sultan was that he was way too used to getting his own way. In other words, a lot like Luke, only worse. The limo pulled up in front of the palace. Casey got out without waiting for the driver again, which seemed to exasperate the man, given the way he huffed out a breath and rolled his eyes. She did, however, wait for Khalid so she could climb the front steps with him. They found the Sultan in the main hall, pacing the floor, looking far too much like an elderly caged bear that wasn't too happy. He stopped his pacing and turned on Khalid.
"What was so important that you could not stay?"
Khalid shrugged and put an arm over Casey's shoulder. She stiffened. Just what was he planning? "What should I say? I have a bride-to-be to entertain. What, did you think marriage would change my ways?" The Sultan's face reddened. Casey glanced from him to Khalid and decided she was done being a pawn for this night. Obviously, Khalid was using this sham of an engagement to irritate his father, and his father was just about as easy to poke as a bear in a cage. More importantly, if Khalid picked a fight with his father right this second, the whole engagement might end up being tossed out and her along with it, and she'd never get her interview. slipping out from under Khalid's arm, and okay, it felt more than good, but she needed a brain back. She offered up what she hoped was a charming smile for the Sultan. "We've been to Medmen, the spa, and I'm starting to think I should take up travel writing. Why, if more folks knew about that place, you'd be overrun with tourists. It's an amazing place. Muntajai Sihi, Khalid called it. You should be proud of such an attraction." The flatter seemed to soothe some of the Sultan's sour mood. His color settled. He smoothed his mustache and turned to Khalid.
"Nevertheless, it was inappropriate to abandon our guests as if you were a boy with no thought to your duties."
Now Casey wanted to roll her eyes. Did these two never give up picking at each other? The Sultan needed a few lessons in how to parent, and Khalid needed a few in how to prove to his father that he could be trusted. Instead, the two men stared at each other, as if each of them was waiting for the other one to blink. Casey decided enough was enough. Faking a yawn, and she had no idea if that was rude or not, she stretched and then said, "Think I'll turn in. Good night." She headed for the stairs, leaving father and son to sort out whatever they could. At least she didn't hear shouting coming up the stairs after her, just some low words swapped. No doubt the two of them poking at each other still, and then a firm set of steps. From the top landing, she glanced back to see Khalid coming up the stairs after her. He offered up a crooked smile.
"My father ordered me to see you to your room to ensure you might be comfortable."
She propped a hand on her hip. "You do know he does that just to see if you're going to jump when he cracks that verbal whip of his." Khalid lifted a shoulder as if it didn't matter to him, but she could see his mouth tighten. She was going to bet he didn't like being treated as if he was 12 still. What man would? Mouth relaxing, Khalid reached her side.
"Fathers and sons in this family have always been half at war. The stories I have heard of my grandfather from my uncles have him being a worse tyrant than my father."
"You know that still doesn't make it right." He shrugged again and led her to her room.
"Right is a matter of perspective at times."
"And other times it's just a matter of right and wrong." His lips twitched. They stopped outside the door to her room, and he touched a fingertip to her cheek.
"So American, always seeing things in absolutes."
She smiled. "It's one of the things you love about me, remember?" His smile faded.
"And this is another."
Leaning close, he touched his mouth to hers. She put a hand on his chest, unable and unwilling to resist. She'd been wanting this ever since she'd seen him naked and dripping wet, and looking good enough to eat with a spoon. She gave a moan, and he deepened the kiss, his lips softening, his mustache and beard scraping her skin ever so slightly. He smelled of the minerals from the spa waters, of spiced oil from his massage, and of something male and compelling, some scent that had to be his own. Her head spun, and a spark sizzled through her, incinerating every intent to keep her distance. She wound her arm around his neck and pulled him closer. He tasted exquisite, exotic, and all too tempting. Before she could lose herself utterly, she pulled back, pushing gently on his chest. He let her break the kiss. She was breathing hard, and so was he. She stared at him. His eyes had darkened.
"Invite me in."
He said the words, a husky rasp that sent a shiver through her. She kept her hand firmly on his chest. "I understand we need to keep up appearances, but let's not start fooling ourselves. I'm gone as soon as I have my story, and you're not a man who settles down with any one woman."
"How do you know I have not met the right woman?"
He took her hand in his and kissed her palm. Then he licked a strip across her wrist where her pulse was skipping. She gave a small laugh. "Yeah, I'll believe that story when the world turns upside down. Good night, lover. Hope you have sweet dreams." She stood on tiptoe to kiss the corner of his mouth because she couldn't resist. Before he could put his arms around her, she opened her door and slipped inside. She closed the door fast, flipped the lock, and collapsed against it, letting out a long breath. And she was still thinking about all that naked, dark skin and strong muscles she'd just turned down. Chewing her lower lip, she wondered if she should open the door and invite him in after all. But she'd been honest. They had no possible future. He was going to be Sultan one day. She was aiming for a Pulitzer. Where was there any room for the two of them in that? Could be a great fling. Shaking her head, she pushed off the door. She needed to keep her mind on her story, and on the fact that women in Sharjah didn't get much choice about their marriages or their lives. A cold shower and changing from that amazing dress into her baggy sweats brought her back down to earth. She rummaged through her backpack and pulled out her laptop. Sitting cross-legged on the bed, she booted up the computer and started to type notes. With immeasurable wealth comes immeasurable power. She wrinkled her nose. The black letters stared back at her on the white screen. While she agreed with the statement, it sounded trite and wasn't a great lead line. She deleted the sentence and stared at the blank screen again. Her mind drifted back to Khalid's kiss. She hadn't expected him to kiss her like that. Her lips were still tingling. So were other body parts. If things had been different, she might enjoy spending time with him. But there was always the specter of his reputation. He was a man who would be great for a few nights, but that was probably it. And Casey knew she was too much a Midwestern girl at heart. She'd tried the casual dating scene in New York and had been awful at it. She keeps looking for the happy ever after instead of the happy for just right now. Shaking her head, Casey reminded herself she was here for a story on how women were nothing more than a possession in this country. But she was also starting to wonder if Khalid really felt like that. He'd gone out of his way tonight to treat her to something special tonight, and he'd seemed, well, different. Maybe he was as trapped in his role as any woman was. Squaring her shoulders, she started typing up more notes. General impressions, descriptions. She got a page done, and then sent an email to Luke to let him know she was scheduling interviews tomorrow. She needed those interviews. That was where the story lay, not in these wandering notes. She needed Fadia's perspective, and she needed to understand Khalid's father. So far he was just an imposing figure, a man who took his role as Sultan almost too seriously. So what did that make Khalid? A son rebelling? A man who didn't know his role because his father was trying to keep him in the shadow of the Sultan? She touched a hand to her lips. Khalid had experience. She had to give him that. He kissed like an expert. But there had been something else in that kiss. Something gentle and coaxing in them. Something passionate and not at all calculated. Glancing down at her laptop, she knew a sheik's kiss wasn't anything she could use in any story. She closed her laptop. She needed those interviews, and she needed to get to know Sheikh Khalid a little better. There was more going on here than a country and a family struggling with the duality of maintaining tradition while stepping into the modern world. "You're too close to it," she told herself. The thought settled in her gut. Was it true? While being on the inside had seemed like a good way to get the information she wanted, was it starting to sabotage her ability to tell the story objectively? Heading to bed, she lay there for a long time, thinking of Khalid, thinking of him naked in the bathhouse, beautiful and sleek, thinking of his kiss, thinking of how far she was willing to let this pretense of an engagement go, and almost, just almost, regretting not inviting Khalid into her bed. Chapter 7. Khalid stood when Casey walked into the palace gardens. The sun had been up for hours, and so had Khalid, trying to figure out a way to get Casey her interviews. His father was not pleased, and that meant when Khalid had approached him early in the day about such an interview, the Sultan had simply told Khalid,
"Attend to your bride. You have a wedding to plan. I have business to occupy me, and your brothers will be busy soothing any feathers you ruffled last night with your inconsiderate behavior."
That remark had stung, and Khalid had been tempted to lash back at his father. The lack of responsibilities, of trust rankled. However, he had a better tool at hand to strike back, so he had sent Casey a note, asking him to meet her in the gardens for a late breakfast. Casey stepped from the palace, lifting one hand to shield her eyes from the already burning sun. This was one reason Khalid rose early. To work before the heat of the day made it wise to seek out cool shade. She had dressed for heat in a pair of shorts that came almost to her knees, a loose shirt, boots, and ankle socks. Khalid's mouth twitched. He was quite certain word would get back to his father of her attire, nothing a Sharjah woman would wear. But she was not bound by tradition, and her long, smooth legs were a delight. He wanted to run his fingers over her pale skin, but for now he settled for a bow and a wave at the table set up under the shade of a palm. "Coffee, or would you care to try our mint tea?" She smiled and said, "Sabah el-Khair." Khalid pulled out a chair for her. "There is no need to impress me, and my father is immersed in business." Sitting down, she glanced up at him. "Meaning no interview?" "Meaning we need to impress him today. I am very much afraid I set back your cause, but advanced my own of his not caring much to have an American become a daughter to him." Instead of anger, Casey shrugged and poured herself coffee from the silver pot on the table. It came out thick, black, and steaming. "Well, then, you'll just have to work first on getting me an interview with Fadia, or her father." Khalid choked down a laugh and sat. "That would be a feat. Just now Mahmoud is unhappy with both me and my family." "Yes, but he needs the connections your family has to American businesses. He's trying to diversify from simply oil holdings, getting into other energy options, and for that he need either a German connection and euros for investment into wind turbines or geothermal, or he needs American companies. Your family brings him the latter without any effort on his part, and from everything I've read, I'm betting he's more than a little lazy." He selected a few pieces of fruit for a honey pastry and passed her the plate. "You have been busy." She ate a date and sipped her coffee and then said, "It's all background stuff. How can you know the right questions to ask if you don't know anything about the interview subject?" "You think to get Mahmoud talking of business and then ask him why he would force his daughter into an arranged marriage." Over the rim of her coffee cup, she grinned. "It isn't going to be that much of an ambush, but that is the general idea. Once someone starts talking, it's often hard for them to stop." "I will warn you now, you will need a more sophisticated approach to my father. You ambush him in such a way and the interview will be over at once. On the other hand, this engagement may also be over at once, so perhaps I should turn you loose on my father." "That sounds like I'm a weapon to use. Not exactly how I'd like to be perceived." Pushing back his chair, he stood and held out a hand. "You do not eat, so let us go and do as my father bids. He said I should show you the beauty of Sharjah, and you may gather more background and shop for your wedding clothes. We are supposed to be setting a date, are we not?" She drank her coffee, put down the cup with a clatter of china, and stood. "Great! More background. Where are we going? And can at least be past where Mahmoud lives?" Taking her hand, he led her toward the front doors. The heat had become oppressive, even in the garden. Sweat stuck his shirt to his back. He had worn a loose shirt and western trousers and boots, and now he could almost wish for the cool robes that were at time a necessity in the desert. But Casey's fingers felt cool in his hand, and soft. "I'll tell you on the way." "Everything's a surprise with you, isn't it?" "You don't like surprises? I never really thought about it. But if you agree to go somewhere with him, does it matter so much where we are going?" "You're forgetting. Reporter here. Asking questions about everything is what I do." "Perhaps you can take the day off," he said, and held the front door open for her. Khalid had done away with the limo for today. Instead, he had his 1950s Land Rover, his prized possession, waiting for them. Casey glanced at him, eyebrows lifted, but climbed into the vehicle when he held the door for her. He knew the Land Rover was not what she had expected, but there was no better way to get around Sharjah, particularly if you wanted to drive off the main roads. Today, Khalid took her to several of the main attractions, the bay with its sheer cliffs and seabirds, and then to the mountains that towered above the desert. He offered a trip for her to hang glide, but she turned that down. However, she took photos with her cell phone, kept asking about interviews, and at last he relented and took her into Sharjah's capital and drove past Mahmoud's high-rise. "Mahmoud's family lives in the top floor, the penthouse. And no, do not even think of trying to get past his security. It is impressive. He keeps a house in the desert as well, but rarely uses it. However, it is possible Fadia is there. Or we might find her shopping. I understand she is like most women and amuses herself with buying things." Casey turned on him. "Most women? Seriously? And what, I'm not supposed to say, 'Oh yes, I just love Fifth Avenue'? You know, you should really try stepping into the current century. 'Most women' is one of those phrases that should be left in the past, and generalities will get you in trouble." "Ah, now I've offended you. Can I make it up to you with dinner? We have several excellent restaurants in the city." She wrinkled her nose. "I'm not dressed for it." She held up a hand. "And no, that's not me angling for a new dress." He nodded. "Then I know just where to go." Weaving in and out of traffic, he drove to the parking garage under one of the Sultan's buildings. He left his Land Rover with an attendant. Casey was out of the car before he could open her door or help her from the high vehicle. Taking her hand, he strode down the street. Casey kept pace with him, something that pleased and amused him. Her eyes widened as they turned down one of the narrow streets in the older part of town. Noise bounced from the hard walls, vendors calling out wares, arguments starting in the coffee shops that lined the streets. With the sun setting, the city cooled, and everyone came out to enjoy the sidewalks and the shops. The aroma of roasting meats, lamb, beef, and camel, filled the air, along with spices. Khalid breathed in deeply. It had been too long since he had last been here. Taking Casey's hand, he wove through the crowds, men in thobes as well as in Western dress, and women in black robes and hijabs. Reaching his favorite tiny cafe, he ordered for them and brought the plates to a small table. Casey earned a few looks for how she was dressed, but he too was glanced at and recognized. He noticed a few bows of respect set his way, which pleased him. He had not been forgotten by his people. After eating, he took Casey back to the palace. She slipped away to her room before he could even think to kiss her again. A wise woman, it seemed, but that only left him more determined to find a way to spend more time with her. For the next week he found things to do with her. Trips to the old market, and for that she had to wear a long skirt and at least a scarf over her head. It was a good distraction for her, for he told her she should speak not just with those in power, but with the ordinary people to see what they thought of women's rights. She certainly got an earful. The people of Sharjah were traditional, mostly. A few spoke out about better rights for everyone, the right to vote, the removal of old laws that hindered business, but most seemed content that the Sultan looked after them, and that in turn allowed each man to look after his family. Getting some interviews at least seemed to satisfy Casey, but Khalid's father kept hinting that a wedding date needed to be set. And Khalid was getting nowhere about reversing his father's opinion. He seemed to be caught. Casey needed the interview with his father that Khalid had promised, and yet he needed his father to be angry enough to release Khalid from his promise to marry, meaning he needed his father to throw Casey out of the country. There seemed to be no way to accomplish both. And then Khalid hit upon a new idea. To appeal to his father's pride and his favorite project, he would take Casey to the Sharjah Desert Reserve, a park established to preserve the animals and local fauna of Sharjah. It took a few days to arrange, but Casey no longer seemed quite so impatient. She admitted as they took the Land Rover out to the park, "I gave my editor, Luke, a deadline. I promised him a story by the end of the month. I've also been sending him my background notes. It's better than nothing." Khalid took his eyes off the narrow road that led to the reserve to glance at her. "What happens if you do not make your deadline?" "Then my job's dead. I'll be back to freelancing stories, and I suppose I can get a few months of travel articles out of where we've been." She let out a long breath. "And there goes my Pulitzer." "That matters to you so much?" he asked. She clenched a fist. "Matters? I've been trying to grab the brass ring for years. Women may have it rough here, but it's not exactly smooth in the States either. If you're a reporter and pretty, they want to style your hair and put you in front of a camera and have you read from a script. That's not reporting, at least not the way I learned it. I want a byline, one that means something. For that I need recognition. I'm never going to get that with fluff pieces." Frowning, Khalid thought about this and then asked, What about a story of ecological dangers in Sharjah? You do know we face the worst of global warming, temperatures rising, meaning possible extinction of animals and plants. And worse, the inability to use the desert as we have for centuries. If the desert dies, my country may die as well." Casey shook her head. "It's not the story my editor wants. But, well, maybe I can do something with it. Maybe it'll buy me time." Khalid gave her a tight smile. "Time is what neither of us have. My father persists in asking us to set a date for the wedding." Waving a hand, Casey said, "Tell him next month. Pick a date, and we'll either have a huge argument right before the wedding, or—" Her words drifted off. "Or?" he asked. "Or I'll just fly off back to the States, and you can be the wounded guy left at the altar by the flighty American." Khalid frowned. For some reason, that did not sound all that appealing. Was it just because his pride would be wounded to be left by a woman? He glanced at Casey. He had spent most of the week with her, but that seemed far too little time. Yet he had gone through other girlfriends even faster. So far he had never felt bored with Casey. He was enjoying himself with her, he had to admit. And he also had to admit he wanted her in his bed. That must be it. He did not want her to be the woman who escaped him before he had enjoyed a night with her. Well, a trip to the reserve might be just the thing to help her gain a new story, and help him seduce her. It took an hour to reach the reserve, and Khalid told her how his father had set family land aside to create the reserve. "It's an amazing place, and my father has been pleased that it both protects the land and animals, and has been a boon to tourism. It is my father's hope he can expand the reserve to do more to breed endangered species, and these are the gates into the reserve." Chapter 8. Casey had to admit the Sharjah Desert Reserve was more than impressive. Once they entered the reserve, she rolled down the window and pulled out her cell phone to get photos. Arabian oryx, with their long horns, grazed in the distance on scrub grass. Falcons soared overhead. It was late enough in the day that the scorching heat had passed, and the desert breeze had a touch of cooling nip. From her background research, she'd read that the Sultan ruled with an iron fist, leaving his sons to be irresponsible party animals. But this showed another side to the family. It seemed as if they took their responsibilities to their country seriously. She also had to admit that the people of Sharjah loved Khalid. She had seen respect in the eyes of those she had met in the street, and she was well aware that no one would have answered her questions if Khalid had not been with her, urging those she met to treat her with respect. He'd given her amazing access to his culture, but that still wasn't a story that would please her editor and break a story that needed to be told about the dark side of this world's repression of women. The road widened, and Khalid pulled up in front of an imposing square building made from the rose-colored desert stone. A sign noted it was the Sharjah Natural History Museum. Another sign pointed to a wildlife center. Shutting off the engine, Khalid asked, "Where would you care to start?" "How about you pick?" Khalid laughed. "For once, you allow me to lead, and at a time when I would rather you pick." "Fine. Wildlife first. It's getting dark. Then museum."
"Ah, but many of the wild animals wake at night."
Rolling her eyes, Casey lifted her hands. "Okay, then museum first. Is this how you end up getting your way so often?"
His smile warmed. "Having my way with you is an easy thing to desire."
Cheeks warming, Casey wondered if there was something else under his words. She ducked out of the vehicle and headed up to the museum, trying to ignore that flash of heat and her body's interest. So far she'd done great at keeping Khalid at arm's length. If he kissed her again, she wasn't going to bet on her being able to say no to him, and she wasn't so sure she was going to get out of this pretend engagement with her heart intact. Khalid was charming, handsome, and a sultan's son. There was no way he was ever really settling down with a Midwestern girl like her. She didn't fit into his world, and well, she was just going to keep telling herself that he wasn't her type. But she kept thinking about having a wild fling with him. Khalid seemed to know the place quite well. He led her on a tour of the museum that lasted a couple of hours and covered every kind of animal to be found in Sharjah, including reptiles and insects she'd just as soon avoid, to the birds, fish, and elegant oryx. "It is my father's pride that we have a large herd of oryx. They were hunted almost to extinction, much like your American bison." Leading the way into an aviary, a lush garden area, Khalid asked, "Are you hungry?" She hadn't thought about it, but realized now that she hadn't eaten all day. "I could eat," she replied. Taking her hand, he led her out to a patio area under the stars. Lanterns lit the area, and awnings flapped in the cool desert breeze. Thick red pillows had been placed around a low table, which was set with candles and plates. "Tonight we dine in the traditional way." Khalid led her to one of the pillows and gestured for her to sit. He sat on the pillow next to her, his legs tucked to one side. Waiters in robes came out with basins, towels, and urns of water so they could wash their hands. From somewhere she heard a band tuning up the traditional instruments, flute of some kind, drums, and a stringed instrument. They began to play a slow, haunting melody. As the food began to arrive, Khalid explained the dishes. Usi, a baked lamb with rice, and lekemat, a sweet bread smothered in chopped dates and honey, and spoke of how his father was using this place to demonstrate how Sharjah could become more sustainable by planting an organic garden and using advanced irrigation and ways to pull water from the dew in the air. "I wish him to build a desalination plant, but my father insists that it is too expensive." "You and he, you don't see eye to eye on much. Have you ever thought you're too much alike?" Khalid frowned. "No, he is all business." "And you're all pleasure, because you don't want to be like him. Is that it?" His frown deepened. He shook his head and smiled. "The talk grows too serious. Let's have entertainment." Straightening, he clapped his hands. Women came out to dance, but not in the costumes she would expect. Instead of flashy belly dancers, 2 women in veils and striped robes came out to sway to the music. Another 2 women came over to Casey and sat next to her, spreading out what looked like brushes and paste of some kind. "Henna," Khalid said, "a bride must be decorated. My father will be pleased to see you wearing henna on your arms. And don't worry, it lasts only a few weeks and then washes off and slowly fades." Casey gave her arms over for the designs, and then the woman gestured for her to change position and give them her feet as well. They giggled as they worked. Khalid fed her dates, and she leaned back, swept away by the beauty of the stars and the music. This had to be a dream, not reality. Here she was dining with a sheikh, the dusty gold walls turning dark as the sun set and the moon rose. She closed her eyes and let the women work on their designs, the brushes tickling at times and somehow seeming soothing too. And then the music stopped. She sat up. The women had left them. The meal was done. Khalid stood over her, a hand held out to her. "Come home with me." She hesitated only a moment, and then put her hand into his. Chapter 9. He watched his beautiful supposed bride-to-be walk into the palace carrying her boots, her feet bare and decorated. Quietly, they wandered up the stairs to her room. For once, she did not shut the door on him, but left it open. He closed it behind him and leaned against it. Casey glanced at him and smiled. Slowly, she began to unbutton her shirt, dropping it to the floor. Her painted hands and arms seemed elegant to him, the designs swirling as she moved. She laughed and said, "This stuff itches." He came over to her and took her hands. "You cannot wash it off until the morning, but I know a remedy. Honey." She shook her head. "Seriously?" Heading into the sweets kitchen, he found the jar of warm honey on the table and came back to her. Coming up to her, he drizzled honey over her arms, put down the pot, and then began to lightly smear the thick liquid over her skin. She smelled like honey now, and he did not resist the urge to lift her hand to his lips and suck on her fingertip. She gave a small gasp. "That feels wonderful." "I know what will feel better." Leading her to the bed, he stripped back the covers. He swept her up and stretched her out on the white linen. She arched her back, unbuttoned her shorts, and wiggled out of them. "So practical," he said, running a hand over her soft cotton bra, trailing his fingers down to her cotton briefs. She smiled and shook her head. Her hair fanned out around her face. "No, practical would be tossing you out. Now shut up and show me just how you got that reputation for being a great lover." He started with her feet, drizzling honey over her toes and rubbing it up her legs. The henna left few places for him to lick, so he settled for teasing touches to the soles of her feet and to the inside of her ankle, left temptingly bare. Getting up, he stripped off his shirt and came back to her to straddle her thighs. "Enjoy," he told her. He drizzled honey onto her stomach and licked it off. She gave another gasp as his tongue touched her skin. She seemed as warm as the desert now, as open as any flower to the rains.
Sorry, readers. Here's where we fade to black due to YouTube explicit content guidelines. If you dream for the steam, you'll need to take a look in the book.
Bending down, he kissed the corner of her mouth. She gave a sigh, and her breathing deepened into sleep. But he could not find his rest. He was starting to wonder if his words to his father of falling in love at first sight had been the truth. Chapter 10. As was his habit, Khalid woke early. He left Casey sleeping. Honey stained the bed linens, but Casey's henna seemed intact, protected by the honey. That would please his father, and Khalid frowned at the thought. Why was he so focused on only what his father wanted? Was Casey right? Was he too much like his father? Was that why they always clashed? Khalid had thought it was because his father would not give over any responsibility to anyone. But was it really that Khalid was just as stubborn, just as set in his ways? He had much to think over. Heading to his room, he showered and changed. He wanted coffee. He wanted to eat breakfast off Casey's naked body. Instead, he was ambushed by his brothers Zaid and Ahmed in the hallway. "Father wants to see us all," Zaid said. He looked unusually serious, even for Zaid. With a shrug, he followed his brothers into his father's study. The Sultan sat behind a huge glass and steel desk. Business for the Sultan was always about Western ways and thought. Khalid resisted looking at the portrait of his mother that hung opposite the desk, the only decoration in the room. Her loss still hurt, still left a twist in his chest. Facing his father, Khalid asked, "What is this about?" French windows opened onto the garden and let in a still cool morning breeze and the scent of flowers. Standing, the Sultan smiled and waved to the slim, tiny woman that Khalid only now noticed, sitting in a corner of the room.
"This is about a wedding, about a husband for Fadia."
As if on cue, Mahmoud stepped into the room from the garden and moved to the Sultan's side.
"Which of you will marry my daughter?"
Khalid fisted his hands and shook his head. "I am engaged already." Mahmoud waved off his words.
"Not you. I would not have you for a son if you came with your weight in gold."
He faced Zaid and Ahmed.
"Now, which of you is to marry my daughter?"
Casey woke and stretched. It had been a long time since she'd had that great a time with any guy. Okay, maybe she'd never had that great a time. She might have been more willing to keep dating if she'd known sex could be that explosive, that amazing. Sitting up, she saw Khalid was gone already. No surprise there. Even so, her heart gave a small lurch. "Get used to it, girl," she muttered. She headed for the shower. The henna was itching again, and she intended to wash it off. She also needed to get her head on straight again. She'd always been career-focused. She was not going to throw it all away for what? A fling? No way was Khalid a forever kind of guy. No, she was going to be practical, just like he had said she was. Last night had been great. Last night had been one night. She was not going to make this a habit. She was not going to fall in love. This was all pretend, fantasy. She glanced at the diamond glittering on her finger and scrubbed harder at the henna. The rough coating came off, leaving behind red swirls that wouldn't come off her skin. She was stuck with that. Getting out, she toweled off. Her phone was buzzing, so she checked the messages. A couple of texts from her sister, and 5 from Luke, all of them pushing for her to send him more. Need that article as of yesterday if you want to keep your job. Frowning, she texted back that she'd meet her deadline and get him more background material. But his texts bothered her. Luke seemed more pushy than usual. Was something up on his end? Was the business down? Was he looking to use her article to boost next month's edition? Well, it didn't matter. Her focus needed to be that article anyway. Throwing on some clothes, she avoided looking at the rumpled bed since it left her thinking too much of Khalid. The room also smelled of honey, leaving her even more determined to get out of here and stop thinking about him, and how great last night had been. She'd head downstairs to get some coffee, breakfast, and some work done. Grabbing her laptop, she slipped out of the room. She had plenty of places to choose from for working and coffee. The kitchen, the dining room, and maybe 100 other rooms. But it was still cool enough that the gardens beckoned. She ignored that small voice that was whispering that maybe Khalid would be there, waiting with breakfast for her. Stepping into the lush gardens, she followed the path to the same spot she'd been before, where she knew she'd find a wrought iron table and chairs. But instead of Khalid being there, a slim, dark-haired woman sat on one of the chairs, her back stiff and her hands folded in her lap. The Sultan didn't have any daughters. So who was this? Well, no matter. She wasn't going to intrude. "Sorry, didn't mean to disturb you." Casey started to turn away. But the woman looked up, and Casey froze. She knew that face. This was the woman Khalid had been about to marry. Fadia had dressed in casual Western clothing, a long, dark brown linen skirt and a white button-up blouse. She sat with a scarf in her fingers and seemed to be wadding it up and then smoothing the patterned silk. She also looked unhappy, her dark eyes huge and sheened by unshed tears and her mouth pulled tight. Standing, she faced Casey. "My father plans to marry me still to one of the Sultan's sons. My wishes do not seem to matter. But you stopped my wedding before. Can you help me?" Casey started to shake her head. "Fadia, please. Even at this moment my father is speaking to the Sultan, arranging my life." She sniffed and brushed at her eyes and sat down again. "I ask too much, I know. I am a stranger. Why should you help me?" Walking over to her, Casey pulled up one of the other patio chairs and sat down. She settled her computer on her lap. "Have you ever thought about telling your father no? Or telling him what you do want?" Fadia nodded and stared at the scarf in her hands. My father is convinced a union between our family and that of the ruling sultans is best for all. But I'm in love with a nobody. A man who is only a security guard here at the palace. Hazim." The way Fadia said the name pretty much told Casey everything. Fadia breathed out the word and her mouth curved into a smile. Her skin almost glowed. So, yeah, she was gone over the guy. Casey had seen just the same look on her sister's face once before. Fadia frowned again. "My father swears if I do not do as he asks and marry one of the Sultan's sons, he will send me to our country house and keep me there for the rest of my days. And he can do that." Rubbing a palm over her computer's smooth metal case, Casey asked, "What about this Hazim? Would he run away with you?" Waving a hand, Fadia shook her head. "How can he? If I am not with my father, I am with my father's security guards. I am never alone. Except for right now. Standing, Casey grabbed Fadia's wrists. Come with me. We're going to have a long girl talk. I want your whole story, and then we'll see what we can do to get you out of this mess and into the life you really want. Chapter 11. Khalid glanced from Zaid to Ahmed, who had turned pale. Zaid seemed to be taking this news that either he or Ahmed was to marry Fadia better in stride. Zaid, in jeans and a white polo, crossed his arms and waited, his expression carefully blank. Ahmed was rubbing the back of his neck. He had dressed in sweats and a t-shirt as if he had been out for an early run, and he must be thinking he was too young to marry. And he was. Turning to their father, Khalid spread his hands. "Father, you cannot—"
"Silence!"
The Sultan stood.
"Khalid, you have your bride. Choosing Zaid to marry makes sense."
Ahmed let out a breath, and Zaid bowed his head. But Khalid could see the pulse beating in Zaid's jaw. The man was angry, and Khalid could not blame him. He could also not think of a way to stop this outrage. He had not considered that when he ended his own possible marriage to Fadia, that one of his brothers would be put in his place. He had thought that Mahmud would have had enough of the whole family. Waving his hands as if to scoot them out of the room, the Sultan said,
Go, go. We have much to discuss. This wedding will take place at once, just so there is no danger of it coming undone. And you, Khalid, I wish you to set a date as well. These long engagements only delay you giving me grandsons."
Khalid started to protest again, but Zaid put a hand on his arm and pulled Khalid from the room. Ahmed followed them out. Once in the hallway, Khalid turned to Zaid. "You cannot be serious about going through with this." Letting go of Khalid, Zaid faced him.
"I know my duty, and I want you to remember, I would not be in this position if you knew your duty as well."
He turned and walked away, his back stiff. Khalid rubbed a hand over his face. "This whole mess is just getting worse with him. Perhaps I should have just married Fadia." Ahmed shook his head. "There was no chance for that, not after your American put an end to your wedding. And I think Father will make certain your American does not interrupt this wedding." "She's not—" "Not what?" Ahmed shook his head. "Not yours. Palace gossip is already buzzing that you spent the night with her. Your marriage to her is now certain, unless she does something horrible." "Such as stop Zaid's wedding?" Khalid sighed. "I doubt Father will allow her to even step foot near the bride and groom until after the ceremony. He no doubt is laying down plans now for extra guards." Ahmed put a hand on Khalid's shoulder. "Get married to your American, Khalid. From what I have seen of her, she is not just beautiful, but she is a woman who will always keep your interest. You will never be bored with that one." Khalid shook his head. "I do not want to be married. I am not ready. But neither is Zaid." Ahmed shook his head. "Why am I the youngest and the only one with sense? Khalid, your American is everything you could want, and if you can't see that, perhaps you are indeed not ready to deserve her." Turning, Ahmed strode away, following after Zaid. Khalid stared after him, wondering if there was perhaps some truth in his brother's words. But he did not like being pushed. Oh, he had slept with Casey, and she had been amazing in bed. He did not want to give that up. Ahmed was right about one thing. Casey was never going to be boring. But marriage? No, this was all being pushed on them by their father. And perhaps it was time the Sultan learned he could not order the entire world to his liking. Chapter 12. The article came pouring out. The interview with Fadia had been just what she'd needed, the woman's point of view about this tradition of arranged marriages, many of which were bound to lead to unhappiness. She tried to balance how the Emirate of Sharjah was slowly coming into the modern world and struggling to balance their traditions with the modern trend of recognizing the rights of the individual. But she wanted to stress that this was one age-old tradition that had to go, and Fadia was a poster girl for the cause. Fadia had been great. She'd been passionate, expressive, and had paced Casey's room as she spoke. Thankfully, Casey's room had been cleaned by the maids. It would have been hard to work in there with the smell of sex and honey scenting the air. But Casey wasn't sure Faria would have noticed a bomb going off in the room. Now she had someone who would listen to her. She poured out her story in a mix of rapid English and Arabic. Faria had wanted to go to college, and her father had refused. She'd snuck in online classes and books to educate herself. She'd met Hazim when her father had come to visit the Sultan and had found someone she could talk to. She'd fallen in love quickly, but had been heartbroken when her father had demanded she marry Khalid. She viewed Casey as some kind of angel sent to save Faria, and Casey was determined now to find a way out of this second arranged marriage for Faria. When Faria had finished with her story, Casey had promised to talk not just to Hazim, but to Khalid as well. Someone had to help this poor girl, and it was about time Khalid told his father that he had to stop being such a tyrant. Now, staring at the story she'd written, Casey bit down on her lower lip. Her finger hovered over the send button because another thought had occurred to her. What was Khalid going to think about this story? It was the truth, and this story needed to be told. But would Khalid see this as a betrayal on her part? Except how could he? He'd known from the start what her views were on arranged marriages in Sharjah. But she couldn't help worrying a little. The story did not paint a great picture of Sharjah as a forward-looking country. Some American companies might well pull back on investments once this story hit the wires. Or that was Casey's hope. Change would only come from outside pressure. Pulling in a breath, she sent the story. Now it was time to see what else she could do for Faria. She closed her laptop and headed to the door. As soon as she opened it, 2 burly men in suits blocked the doorway. She glanced from one to the other. There was no missing the fact that these were the same 2 that had dragged her out of Khalid's failed wedding and handed her over to the local police. Neither man smiled, but one said in lightly accented English, "The Sultan would prefer you to stay in your room for the next 2 days. "He would?" Narrowing her eyes, she asked, "I don't suppose one of you is named Hazim." The 2 guards swapped looks but said nothing. Casey nodded. "Tell Hazim I want to see him, and he'd better be here in the next hour or I'm going to start making some noise, and you both know I can be more than a handful." She closed the door on them. Heart pounding, she leaned against the door. Did Khalid know she was being held a virtual prisoner in her own room? Heading to the balcony, she glanced down. Too far to jump. Too hot as well. Maybe she could make a rope from knotted sheets, but she'd only seen that done in movies. She had the feeling any knot she tied would come undone. However, she had the palace phone, her cell, and her computer. She was not without resources. She was also starting to wonder just why the Sultan wanted her locked up. But the answer seemed obvious. The Sultan was ready for one of his other sons to marry Faria, and if he wanted Casey out of the way, that had to mean the wedding was supposed to happen right away. Faria wasn't just being pushed into a marriage, she was being shoved in right away. Sitting down on her bed, Casey started sending out texts, and cursing because she'd never gotten Khalid's number. She did, however, have the palace phone, and hopefully she had Hazim coming to see her. It took Hazim over an hour. She'd ordered breakfast, a large one, and had tried to get the maid to take a note to Khalid for her. The maid had turned pale and hurried away, as if frightened to do anything for Casey. She was going to guess the Sultan had sent out orders to make sure Casey didn't stop this second wedding with a scene. But Casey had other plans. She'd also gotten texts out to Luke, one asking him to track down Khalid's private cell number, but that was going to take time. And she'd texted her sister. Candace was a whiz with online research and followed a dozen gossip websites. She might be able to get Khalid's information faster than Luke could. Casey had downed her coffee, nibbled on some sweet pastries, and was starting to write an article in her head on tyrant sultans when a knock sounded on her door. She jumped up, her pulse skidding into high gear, and was almost a little disappointed when a stranger stepped into the room. She realized then she'd been hoping to see Khalid. She faced the guy and folded her arms over her chest. "Hazim, I presume?" He gave a small nod and shut the door behind him. I had word you wished to speak to me?" She nodded and waved him into the room. She didn't want the guards at the door to overhear anything. "I spoke to Fadia earlier today." Hazim's steps faltered. He recovered and headed to the French doors. For a moment he stared out the glass, then turned to her. He was a good-looking man. Not as handsome as Khalid, but rugged and broad. He wore his black hair close-cropped. His dark eyes seemed hooded and guarded, and he had hands the size of good-sized hams. He tucked one hand into his suit pocket. Casey shook her head. Hazim obviously wasn't the talkative type. "Look, I know she's in love with you, and you're in love with her." "She is to marry Sheikh Zayed tomorrow." Casey stared at the man. "You don't sound all that upset." He lifted one hand. "What can I do?" "You could do something. Do you love the woman or not?" "My wishes do not matter. I work for the Sultan." With a low growl, Casey threw her arms up. "I'm about ready to let whatever happens to you happen. But I promised Fadia some help. Now are you going to help me?" He gave her a wary stare. "Help out?" "As in get me out of this room. I need to see Khalid." Hazim shook his head. "I will ask Sheikh Khalid if he will come to see you. More I cannot do. Fadia, it was never meant to be. I knew that always. And Sheikh Zayed is not a bad man." He started to the door, but Casey stepped into his path. "So you're not going to do anything to save the woman you love from a marriage she doesn't want?" He stared at her, his expression as impassive as ever. "I do not expect you to understand our ways." "I sure don't. A man should be willing to help the woman he loves." "It is not. The Sultan rules Sharjah. We must trust in his wisdom." Hazim walked out of the room. Casey stood facing the door, shaking her head. "Like hell we must." Khalid's day had been more than stressful. He had gone to Zayed to apologize and had asked to at least handle all arrangements for his brother. Zayed had agreed. He seemed indifferent to his fate, and that worried Khalid, and that left him wondering if Casey's attitude was rubbing off on him. Hazim had come to tell Khalid that Casey wished to see him, but Khalid had much to do and little time. He had sent back word he would see Casey as soon as he could. If it was important, she would have come to him directly. She would have to wait. Then he had gone to speak the palace staff. The wedding had to be traditional, he told them. Highly traditional. Robes and veils, and the palace ballroom turned into what seemed to be the inside of a tent with yards and yards of fabric. The lighting would be colored lanterns only. No electricity. When the cook asked about food, Khalid decided he had enough for his plans in place and simply said, "Whatever delicacies you think best." He left the staff scurrying to obey his orders, and then went to find Ahmed to draft him into his scheme. He had thought Ahmed would balk, but Ahmed grinned and agreed to become Zayed's shadow, and to do his part tomorrow. Satisfied all was in place, Khalid started to Casey's room, but came upon his father in the main hallway. His father stopped in front of him. The Sultan had changed into a casual thobe without a headscarf. His stare raked Khalid, and he said,
"Just what are you planning, Khalid?"
Khalid struggled for as innocent a look as he could muster. It was one he had long practiced as a boy. "Father, what do you suspect? I have simply been helping to ensure the staff is prepared for the wedding tomorrow." And that was the utter truth. The Sultan shook his head.
"Khalid, I have known you all of your life. Do you not think I know that look of yours? You have something in mind, some mischief. Why must I be possessed of such undutiful sons?"
Khalid's mouth tightened, but he bit back the word that sprang to mind and the hot anger. Had not Casey said he was too much like his father? Trying to keep that in mind, he forced a smile. "I promise an excellent day, father."
"And your own wedding, Khalid. What plans do you make for that? Your honor is at stake. This American is not the woman I would have chosen for you, but it seems I have underestimated her."
Frowning now, Khalid asked, "What do you mean?" With a slight smile, the Sultan gestured for Khalid to follow him to his office. He pulled out a computer from his desk. One he kept hidden to preserve the appearance of an old-fashioned office. In truth, the Sultan was more conversant with computers and the modern era than most in his country. With a few keystrokes, he called up a website.
"You're Casey. I must admit she can write. And such a story as this will bring tourists to Sharjah."
Khalid scanned the article. It had been published in an online magazine and seemed to be all about Casey's visit to various places in Sharjah, including the reserve. Thankfully, she had not written about having sex with one of the Sultan's sons, but everything else was there. Straightening, Khalid glanced at his father. "So, this pleases you? You think her useful, and that makes it a good alliance?" The Sultan wagged a finger.
"Good enough. And Mahmud is pleased to see his daughter as a bride. Now go, and set a date with your bride."
"Oh, I plan to speak to her at once," Khalid said. He headed out of his father's office, ran up the stairs, and paused when he saw the guards outside Casey's room. He waved a hand to dismiss them.
"You may go."
Neither man moved.
"The Sultan has ordered us to remain here." "And I am ordering you to go. Or do you wish to find new employment?"
The two men swapped uneasy looks. Khalid let out a breath and added,
"What kind of man do you think I am if I cannot control my own woman?"
That seemed to leave them thinking. They also gave short bows and left. Thankfully, they had no real knowledge of Casey, and Khalid had no illusion that he controlled this woman. That article she had written proved such a thing. Opening the door, he stepped inside to find her pacing. She stopped and glanced at him. Relief seemed to spread over her face, and she came to him at once and put her arms around him. She hugged him tightly, let go, and then asked, "Where have you been? I've been stuck here all day trying to get word to you that your father has kept me a virtual prisoner. Do you know your brother is being forced to a marriage with—"
"Yes, I know. And no, I do not care. I have it handled."
"Handled?" She took another step back. "What does that mean?" Instead of answering her, he headed to her computer. It was on, and he pulled up the same website his father had shown him.
"It means you need not concern yourself. But you may tell me why you write such praises of Sharjah. I thought you meant to write a scathing article on arranged marriages."
Blinking, she came over to him, moving wary, as if she feared he might pounce on her. He turned the screen so she might see her work displayed. Her mouth sagged open. She leaned over the computer and paged down on the article. It is my writing, but that's not my article. That's the background information I sent to Luke, my editor. It wasn't supposed to see print."
"Well, the result is that you have pleased my father. He is now all for our marriage."
Casey faced him. "What? He's supposed to disapprove and throw me out of the country. I've got my interview." It was Khalid's turn to stare. A pulse began to beat hard behind his left temple.
"What interview?"
With Fadia. I found her in the garden just about in tears over being forced into yet another marriage. Did you know she's in love with the head of your security?"
Khalid waved away the comment. "That does not matter. I told you I have it handled."
Casey crossed her arms. "Well, you haven't told me how you have it handled."
"It is—"
"I know, no concern of mine. But it is. I promised Fadia to help." With a low growl, Khalid stalked across the room and back. Facing Casey, he told her,
"My father thinks you are a fit bride. We now must set a wedding date because of your praising Sharjah in print." He waved at the computer screen. "That is our problem."
"Oh, please." Dropping her arms to her side, she slammed the computer lid shut. "The other article I sent to Luke will make your father unhappy."
"And when does that appear? In a week? A month?"
Skin going pale, Casey lifted her chin. "You want out of this engagement so badly." Lifting her hands, she struggled to pull off the ring. It wasn't budging. Huffing now, Casey said, "Consider it off. End it. I'll be on a flight out of here the day after tomorrow." Putting a hand over hers, Khalid tried to stop her from pulling her ring off. She jerked away from him.
"Casey, this does not mean we have to stop seeing each other. I don't want—"
"What? You don't want to get married, but you don't want me to go. So you just want a good time with me and then to move on?" Tears sheened her eyes. "I've been such a fool. I thought last night might have meant... Oh, never mind. Just get out. I'm tired of you telling me you have everything handled with Fadia, but you won't tell me a thing. I'm tired of being a pawn in this power play between you and your father. And I just thought..." She let the words fade. Turning away, she yanked off the ring and slammed it down on the table next to her laptop. "Casey, She turned on him. "No. Not one more word. Just go." Chapter 13. The palace ballroom looked better than any tent ever could. Gold and white fabric draped the ceiling and walls, peeking at a huge lantern with colored glass that cast rainbow hues onto the fabric. Candles flickered in 100 other lanterns, and thank heavens, just about everyone had worn traditional robes and headscarves, Casey included. She had managed to slip out of her room early in the morning, before the heat of the day or even before the sun had risen. After she'd thrown Khalid out, the guards had come back to bar her door, so she'd gone for the sheet rope after all. She'd managed to shimmy down it and land without too much bruising. She'd waited near the front gate, lurking behind bushes and feeling more like some kind of stalker, until Fadia had arrived in a limo. Fadia had also arrived with maids and friends, all of them chattering. It had been easy to follow Fadia, but it had taken some work, and borrowing a maid's uniform from the laundry before Casey could at last corner Fadia in the bathroom where she was dressing. "There's not much time, so you have to do exactly as I ask," Casey had told her. Fadia just nodded as if she trusted Casey implicitly. Now Casey was just hoping this whole thing didn't blow up too soon. She kept her head down and her veil over her face. The henna on her hands marked her, but no one seemed to really be noticing that. She could also keep her hands mostly hidden in her robe. The veil covered her head and most of her face, leaving only her eyes revealed. She'd put on a lot of makeup and kept her stare lowered, and no one seemed to think she should say much. Risking a glance around the room, she took in the 24 people gathered. This affair seemed a smaller event than Khalid's wedding had been, with just relatives attending, if you went by the robes and traditional garb. The guests settled into clumps. No chairs had been set out, and Casey figured it was about time for the wedding to start. She took a deep breath and pressed a hand to her stomach, which was currently doing backflips. She was probably going to end up in jail again, but she'd thought ahead this time and had emailed Luke in advance to warn him she was going to need his help getting out of Sharjah. She'd also blasted him for publishing her background material without so much as a heads up. No one ever won a Pulitzer for fluff travel pieces. One of the other women standing next to her nudged her arm and said something in Arabic. She was going to guess that was a hint to get moving. Wetting her lips and staring at the carpet design, she started forward. Zaid had entered from the other side of the room. She could tell that from the flutter of movement and the creak of a door. Sneaking another glance, she saw he'd gone for full traditional dress. Flowing robes, headscarf, and, like her, he seemed to prefer to keep his head down. Great. Neither of them really wanted this. She was doing more than a favor for Fadia. She was probably saving the girl from a lifetime of misery. And then something caught her eye. For a moment she thought, oh, but no, that was just her mind playing tricks. She was seeing Khalid's broad shoulders and his athletic movement under Zaid's robes because she wanted to. She'd been such a fool. She'd known from the start that Khalid was a playboy, a man who didn't want to settle down, but she'd gone ahead and slept with him. She'd thought she could keep it all fun and games. Instead, he'd not just rocked her world, he'd rocked her heart. She hadn't wanted to admit it, but when he was so upset about having his father's approval for their engagement, she had realized the truth. He didn't love her. He never had. She was just one more girl he had taken to bed. She was just a fling. The truth had hurt. Well, she was done with him and with this whole country. She was getting Fadia out of this jam of an arranged marriage to Zaid, and then she was out of here. That was, if she wasn't in jail. Staring down at her red and gold robes, she thought she'd never worn anything so lovely. Her heart tightened. She'd always thought her wedding dress would be white, but now she thought she'd never seen anything more beautiful. It was going to be a shame to have to change it for prison garb. When she reached the front of the room, she stopped and stood still, her heart hammering. Zaid had reached her side. She peeked up at him from under her lashes and her veil, but she couldn't see more than his shadowed face. His headscarf hid his features. The cleric started to speak, and Casey wished now she'd brushed up on Arabic weddings. Was she married now or at the end? Did she pull off her veil now and blow this up? She wanted to wait as long as she could to give Fadia and Hazim time to get as far away as they could, but she also didn't want to end up as Zaid's bride. She started to count. At 20, she'd pull off her veil and face whatever came next. Instead, when she hit 10, the man standing next to her straightened and pulled off his headscarf, and Casey stared up at Khalid's face, not Zaid's. Khalid pulled off his keffiyeh and turned to face those gathered. He heard the gasps and the muttered curse from his father. Mahmoud stood and shot an accusing finger at Khalid and started to demand what trick this was. Khalid knew that Ahmed had spirited Zaid from the palace after slipping sleeping tablets into Zaid's tea this morning. At least his father would not be able to prop up a confused Zaid and insist this wedding continue. But he was under no illusions about his fate. His father would most likely disown him. However, that did not seem to matter. Not when he feared he had lost Casey. He had never thought love could happen so fast, but it seemed that with him it had. When she had pulled off the ring he had given her, he realized then that he was in love with her. He had seen the tears glinting in her eyes, and they had torn into him as nothing ever had. But she would not listen to him. Perhaps she would listen after this. She must. That was assuming his father did not throw him into prison. Glancing around the room, Khalid raised his voice and said, "I am sorry, but this wedding cannot continue. I am not Zaid, and I know Mahmoud will not have me for a son-in-law." The Sultan stepped forward from the crowd.
"Khalid, you dare make a mockery of this ceremony?"
The room seemed to be buzzing with whispers and gasps and shocked laughter. Raising his hands, Khalid said, "The mockery is in the arrangement. This woman loves another man, yet is being asked to give up her happiness, and for what? For nothing more than an alliance, one that could easily be worked out on paper. This makes no sense. Everyone, thank you for attending, but once again you will not be witnessing a wedding. It is one thing to arrange a marriage when the bride and groom are agreeable to such a thing, but to force a woman into a marriage she does not desire will dishonor my family with a partnership based on lies. My father sees tradition. I see injustice. I will honor traditions when it is wise to do so, but when tradition threatens only sorrow, I must do what I can to change the way of things. Father, we must look to the future, and our future is one best served by undoing what is unjust." Mahmoud's face reddened. He sputtered. Khalid kept his stare on his father's face. The Sultan was frowning, but had not ordered Khalid to be dragged from the room, nor had he asked where Zaid was. Both were good signs. Khalid started to relax, and then the woman standing next to him pulled back her veil. Gasps echoed around the room. Khalid turned and stared down at Casey's face and her bright blue eyes. "I guess now is the time I should explain I'm not Fadia."
"Where is my daughter? What have you done with her?"
Mahmoud demanded. He stormed forward. The Sultan lifted a hand.
"I think it is time to take this to my office. Khalid, you and that American, follow me. Mahmoud, you will come as well. Everyone else, please wait, and I will arrange for refreshments to be sent in."
Turning, the Sultan strode away, his robes swirling. Khalid turned to Casey and held out a hand. "I thought I told you I had this handled." She smiled at him, but the expression seemed hard. "Seems we had the same idea." Pushing past him, she followed the Sultan. And Khalid couldn't help but frown. She had not taken her hand. Once the door to the Sultan's study closed, the Sultan faced Khalid.
Explain this farce.
Khalid shrugged. Did you not choose your own wife, my mother? But you expect others to accept your choices in all things. Zaid was willing to do this, but once I learned that Fadia's heart belongs to another, I could not allow her life to be ruined. The Sultan turned on Mahmud.
Is this true? Your daughter has affections for another. Why did you say nothing of this?
Mahmud spread his hands.
Fadia is but a girl. She sees a man who works security here in the palace and makes him into something more. It is nothing more than a fancy. She is a dutiful daughter and will make a good, obedient wife.
So obedient she runs off first chance she gets, Casey muttered. The Sultan picked up his phone and barked out orders to bring Fadia and whoever might be with her back to the palace. Casey's eyes sparkled, and she opened her mouth to say something more, but Khalid stepped forward. He would have his father's wrath upon him, not Casey. Father, this plan was all mine, and mine alone. That's not true, Casey said, the words sputtering out. Khalid shot her a frown. She glared back at him, then glanced at the Sultan. I told Fadia I'd help her, and I did, and she really is in love with Hazim.
My head of security.
The Sultan sat down with a thump in his desk chair.
Has all the world gone mad?
Turning to Mahmud, Khalid asked, Tell me, Mahmud, if my father said he sees Hazim as almost another son, for the man has been with our family forever, if a marriage there would bring you an alliance to our family, would you be happy with that? Mahmud shifted on his feet. He glanced from Khalid to the Sultan and then said, Does not every father wish to see his child happy? The Sultan stood.
I am done talking. Mahmud, go and find your daughter when she has returned and see her settled with her Hazim. You have my word, such a marriage is as good as marriage into my family. It may not make your grandson Sultan, but I can tell you this. You are fortunate not to have any of my sons in your family, for they are nothing but trouble.
Mahmud opened his mouth as if he would say something, but he snapped it closed, bowed, and left the room. The Sultan turned to Khalid.
What did I ever do to be cursed with a son such as you?
Khalid laughed. The Sultan stiffened, and Casey turned to stare at him, but Khalid had realized the utter truth in Casey's words. He was his father's son. Khalid knew he could easily have turned into a despot such as his father, was if he lacked the help of someone at his side to show him a better way. He glanced at Casey, but now was not yet the time to speak to her. First, he must calm his father, and prevent any of his father's anger falling on Casey or on his brothers. Father, you are cursed with sons who are as strong as you are. We have your iron will, we have your pride, we have your short temper. We defy your orders because we would have our own lives. Would you really care more for us if we had no spines, if we simply bowed to your will even when we disagreed? The Sultan said nothing, but he began to stroke his beard. Khalid stepped closer to Casey. I have this woman to thank for showing me the truth of this. I am your son, and it is because I am that I defy your orders and think for myself. In truth, I think you would be unhappy with anything less. You do not want a stupid man to become the next Sultan. The Sultan gave a rude snort and turned to Casey.
So, you are the one I have to thank for turning my sons against me.
Casey started to shake her head. Khalid opened his mouth to say something, but Casey shot him a look, and suddenly he knew she would not thank him for stepping into this. She had something to settle here as much as he had. Turning them against you? Casey pulled in a breath and seemed to struggle to calm her voice. Haven't you been pushing them? Testing them? Trying to see if you can bend them or break them? How much respect can you have for anyone who just rolls over and does what you want without putting up a fight? I think what you really want is to know your sons have become good men. You worry they will not be able to take on the responsibility of managing a country or a business or anything else. You worry so much that you hold back those responsibilities. I think you've been waiting for them to do just this, to show you they're grown men who can manage their own lives and find their own wives." Khalid could see the spark in his father's eyes. They had pushed him far enough for one day. Before his father could say anything, Khalid grabbed Casey's hand. "You must excuse us, father. I do have my own wife to settle." He pulled a protesting Casey from the room, but he glanced back and saw his father smiling and shaking his head. Outside his father's study, Casey jerked away. "Oh, no, you're not going to start using your charm to—" "You think I'm charming?" Khalid stepped closer to her. She backed up a step. "I think you're a man who has had too many women fall into your lap. You're spoilt, and you really are a little irresponsible. But that was a good thing you did back there, stepping in to save your brother from being pushed into a marriage with a woman who was in love with someone else. I just don't know why you couldn't have told me what you were planning." "Perhaps for the same reason you could not tell me. We have not yet really learned to trust each other with our hearts." He put his hands on her waist. She turned her head to give him a sideways look. "Okay, I'm not so sure I'm all that comfortable with the talk about hearts. Is this yet another line of yours?" "No, I have run out of lines. I have only the truth. Just as I gave my father the truth, I will tell you what is in my heart. This pretense engagement has become too real for me. I did not even see it until you pulled off the ring you gave me. Suddenly I could see you walking away from me, and I knew if that happened I would lose you. I cannot. You are right. Our night together did mean something. It meant I have fallen in love with a woman who is bold and independent, and whose courage shines like the sun. Casey, I did not think love could happen like this, blooming overnight like a desert flower. But it does. At least it has for me. This time I ask you to marry me. Marry me to make me a better man. Marry me so that the truth you seek and speak will always be close to me. Marry me because I love you." She swallowed hard and put her hands over his. "Khalid, I don't... Are we crazy? We've known each other, what, a few days? A couple of weeks? This is...
Is what? Do you think more time will change how we feel? I know how much I ask of you. I cannot leave Sharjah, so you must leave your world if you join your life to mine. But I swear to you, I will not change my feelings for you. And I will not ask you to give up everything. There is no need for you to stop writing or to stop seeking your Pulitzer. But I want you with me." She shook her head, but she didn't remove her hands from his. "What about your whole not wanting to get married?" He took a deep breath. "What I wanted was to avoid marrying the wrong woman. I knew that today as I walked up to the woman I thought was Fadia, and all I could think was that a merciful God would have put you waiting to wed me. I have spent so long avoiding things I do not want. But today, for the first time in my life, I realized exactly what I do want, and it is you by my side. Please, will you marry me?" She bit her lower lip, and then wrapped her arms around his neck. "How about you ask me again in a few weeks, after my article on arranged marriages comes out? I want to make sure your father doesn't decide I'm really, really bad for you and your family." He frowned. "You are going to make me work for this, aren't you?" "Hey, what comes too easy is never appreciated. Besides, if we're doing this for real, I want my sister here. And a few relatives. And some time to plan a proper wedding." Khalid smiled. He swept her up into his arms. "I have a much better idea. Let us discuss this while we are in bed." Chapter 14. Ahmed smoothed his robes and asked, "This time you are really getting married?" Khalid glanced at him. His palms had started to sweat, and he paced in front of the doors that opened onto the gardens. Casey had wanted to wed in the gardens, and had said, "I've had enough of ballroom weddings." Wetting his lips, Khalid nodded. "Hazim has his orders.
If anyone tries to disrupt this wedding, he is to have every palace guard stop the interruption. I am getting married." He patted his brother's back. "Now, lead the way, please." With a grin, Ahmed headed into the gardens. Khalid pulled in a breath, smoothed his keffiyeh, and followed Ahmed. Casey waited for him, her sister Candace at her side, and Faria as well, both women in golden gowns. Faria looked happily radiant, and a diamond sparkled on her ring finger, but Khalid thought no woman could outshine Casey today. She wore a deep red gown with gold embroidery. However, instead of the traditional robes, she had had the dress done in a modern style, fitted close with long sleeves. In a nod to tradition, a gold scarf covered her head. Khalid could see her hand shaking slightly. She was nervous, afraid something would happen or that Khalid would change his mind. Last night in bed she had confided her worries. He had done everything he could to soothe them, to use his mouth and his hands and his body to show her how much he loved her. Perhaps she would feel better once they were truly wed. When he reached her side, Casey leaned close and whispered, "Do you think anyone's going to stop this wedding? Or is the third time the charm?" Khalid glanced down at her. "The entire Sharjah army could not stop me from making you my wife." The ceremony proceeded. Khalid kept glancing around, half afraid he had cursed the day by saying no one could stop Casey from becoming his wife. He spotted Hazim near the garden doors. Hazim gave a nod and a thumbs up. And then suddenly it was done. Casey let out a long breath. Khalid's father clapped him on the shoulder and said,
"May she bring you as much trouble as you have brought me, and may your sons follow in your footsteps."
Khalid could only grin. Ahmed was there to congratulate him, as was Zaid, who leaned close and said, "Someday I will pay you back for giving me the mother of all headaches." With a laugh, Khalid turned to the crowd. "To the feast!" The music, food, and dancing went on late into the night, but when it seemed that everyone was wrapped up in the entertainments, Khalid sought out Casey and pulled her to the side and under a lighted palm. "Come, let us leave now before we have to endure one more set of congratulations." "What about my sister?" she asked. He looked around and saw Ahmed dancing with Candace, the two of them laughing. "Oh, I think there is no need to worry about her." Wrapping his arms around her, he leaned in and kissed her, taking his time to explore every inch of her mouth. He would never tire of these kisses or the way she seemed to melt against him. She gave a soft hum and pulled back. "Okay, what if I want to show off my new husband? It's quite a coup, you know, getting the playboy sheik to settle down with me. Maybe there's a story in it." Tugging on her hand, he led her toward the front of the palace, saying, "I would rather give you another story, one where I get to enjoy my bride." "Typical tyrant," Casey said. She stood with her back to the window of the penthouse suite in a luxury hotel. Khalid had spirited her away in a limo, and now they had privacy as well as luxury. A private elevator had taken them to the top floor. Flowers decked the room, which had a sitting room as well as 2 bedrooms. Khalid had led her to the bedroom with the view and had said they would spend the next 3 days here. "You really do love giving the orders," Casey said, her head tipped to one side. Khalid had stripped off his headscarf, outer robes, and boots. He stood before her in a light shirt and the traditional baggy trousers of Sharjah. "Ah, but while I order the world, you are the one who orders my heart. What do you wish of me, wife?" He spread his hands wide. She turned her back to him. "Care to help me out of my wedding dress?" He came close, unzipped her gown, and pressed a kiss to every inch he exposed. He slipped the dress off her shoulders. She shivered and said, "Do you think we could spend part of the year in New York? Maybe the summer months? Or the fall? It's beautiful in New York in the fall." With a wordless answer, he turned her and kissed her. She could feel the world just melt away. In his arms, nothing else mattered. She was not just part of his world, she was part of him. He swept her up and carried her to the bed. Laying her down, he said, "I have a surprise for you." She propped herself up on her elbows. She'd worn no stockings, only red silk underwear. She'd left off a bra as well. The dress hadn't really needed one. Khalid tugged off his shirt, and she took a moment to admire the lines of his back. His muscles worked as he gathered up something and came back to her. "What are you planning?" Smiling, he straddled her. "You had no time to do a proper job of your henna for your wedding, so I'm going to paint you with my vows." She wrinkled her nose. "Henna itches." "Ah, but warm honey does not, and I have the pleasure of licking it off you after." She lay back and spread her arms. "What will you write?" He dipped a brush into a pot. "I will write of my love for your beauty." She sucked in a breath. The honey was warm and sticky and oddly sensual. "I will write of how you are unlike any woman I have ever met before. I write of your courage and spirit, and also how I met you in jail." She laughed and took the brush from him. "Do I get to write something too?" He handed her the honey pot and lay back on the bed. "What do you wish to write on my body?" She straddled him. "Beautiful lover." She swirled the words over his chest. "That's about all I know in Arabic." Leaning over him, she settled the honey pot and brush on the nightstand. Flipping onto her back, he loomed over her. "Ah, before I forget, I have a wedding present for you." He rolled off the bed and came back to her with a slip of paper. She stared at it a moment and then looked at him. "You bought Luke's magazine?" Khalid shrugged and stretched out next to her. "You may keep writing for this Luke or not, as you choose. But I did not like the idea of his magazine struggling, and this idea of his to do more articles on Sharjah. It is a good one. We need more people to know that Sharjah is both a safe place to visit and a lovely one." She tossed the paper aside and threw a leg over his legs. "You mean you want me to turn into a travel writer?" "You say that as if it is a bad thing." He pushed her back onto the bed. "Tell me I can inspire you to write lyrical praises for Sharjah." She ran her fingers over the muscles on his chest, trailing her hand down to his stomach, and then dropping lower. "Why don't we talk about this later? Much, much later. I want to get back to your reputation as an amazing lover and just how you earned it. I also have honey starting to dry on my skin, and—" He cut off her words with a kiss that left her breathless. When he pulled back, he said, "I am yours to command, my love." Epilogue. Casey stared at the article she'd written. Luke had published it, and that was that. It disappeared without a trace. However, the background material she'd sent Luke was still generating emails. Frowning, Casey knew she'd made a discovery, one that didn't please her. She was a better travel writer than she was a reporter. Reading over the background material, she could see she'd already been starting to fall in love with Khalid and Sharjah. Looking up from her laptop, she stared out to where Khalid was swimming. They'd decided to spend a week at one of the beach resorts in Sharjah. The place left her longing to write about it. White sands, crisp blue water, happy people, and an environmental slant on the resort, so everything was recycled or reused. She was also getting used to being married to a sheikh. It had more than a few advantages, including having been able to fly her sister to Sharjah and then home again on a private jet. Candace was still raving about the wedding and had sent Casey 200 photos of the event. Coming out of the water, Khalid grabbed a towel to dry off. Casey's mouth went dry. Dripping wet, the man was beautiful. Tall, tan, and movie star muscles left him quite the eyeful. She picked up her tropical fruit drink and said, "I'm done as a reporter." Khalid sat down in the chair next to her and pulled her feet into his lap. "Oh? And why?" She waved at the scenery, the palms, the warm breeze from the desert, and the sun glinting on the bay and the luxury hotel behind them. built low so it blended into the rocky coastline. I'm becoming a travel writer. All I seem to want to do is focus on raving about this lavish, carefree lifestyle. The corner of Khalid's mouth curved.
What if you had a look behind things? A sheikh's life is not all about fun. I have a business meeting to attend for my father this afternoon. I could ask the hotel manager to let you talk to the staff. They would show you the other side of the pleasure, how much work it is to make the guests feel pampered.
She sat up suddenly. That's it. I don't have to do travel articles. That's fluff. But a book, that's something substantial. It wouldn't just be a travel guide, it'd be the insider's guide. A look behind the scenes. She jumped up and kissed him. When can I start? This afternoon? You don't need me at this meeting, do you?
Khalid grinned. Want, yes. Need, no. Besides, I think my father has been sending meetings my way as a way of testing if what you told him is true, that his sons are ready for responsibilities. But I also think he would shudder to have you at one of these meetings. He is not quite certain what radical American ideas you might have.
Grabbing her wrap, Casey slipped it on over her swimsuit and grabbed her laptop. Khalid stood and slipped his hands up under the cover-up and onto her skin.
We have time before my meeting and your tour of the hotel. I suggest we use it well, and I want to thank you, my lovely wife.
Casey blinked. Thank me for what? You're the one who just gave me a great idea.
And you are the one who has helped my father see me for more than a sulky sheik. You are like a breath of air every day. I think I am a better man with you, and a lucky one to have you as my wife. I feel almost as if I have been given a true chance to prove myself, and to step out from my father's shadow.
She heard the hesitancy in his voice and knew the words did not come easy to him. Wrapping her arms around his neck, she told him, You're not the only one who had a chance for a new life here. I might have been stuck doing the same thing over and over, trying to be something I really wasn't. I always thought Luke was holding me back, that if only I could get a spectacular story that would make my career. Now I can look back and see I wasn't writing with my heart. I was trying to impress everyone. Sharjah showed me a new world, and my real talents. I'm the one who needs to thank you, she confessed. Khalid tightened his hold on her waist, his skin cool against hers.
Shall we take our mutual thanks and admiration into the bedroom where it can be better expressed?
Casey laughed and kissed her gorgeous husband. Please, always, forever. Standing up on tiptoe, she kissed him, hungry for more, running her hands over his back. He pulled away, let out a long breath, and took her hands.
Too much more of that in public may lead to both of us in jail, for it will have me stripping off that very small bikini of yours to make love with you on the sand.
Wrapping an arm over her shoulder, he started back to their room. She fell into step with him. Resting her hand on the small of his back, she asked, Do you think this really will last? Will we be this much in love with each other in 10 years? 20? 50? He stopped and turned her to face him.
I love you, Casey. I will always love you. This will last not just 10 years or 20 or 50, but for as long as the sands burn and the ocean whispers.
She wrapped her arm around his waist. Take me to bed and make love to me, my sheik. And then you're off to a meeting and I'm getting a tour and starting a book. And we're going to live one amazing story. He pulled her closer to him.
But of course we are.
This has been The Sheikh's Forced Bride, Sharjah Sheikhs, Volume 1, written by Leslie North, narrated by Nicholas Thurkettle.